शिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिनि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिनि शङ्करतोषिनि किल्बिषमोषिनि घोषरते धनुजनिरोषिनि दितिशुकरोषिनि दुर्मथतोषिनि सिन्धुसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. Let me know if the audio is coming fine. Vraj Modi, good evening. Hi Rohan, good evening. Hi Nandish. Nandish is saying Tulsi Gabbard released a video on Veterans Day. She's a veteran too. Look it up, please. Yeah, I know she's a veteran, but I didn't see her new video. I have watched her. The longest podcast I've watched where she has appeared is her, Jocko Willink, and Joe Rogan, all three together. That's one of the most phenomenal podcasts. And for any woman out there, Tulsi is the ideal role model, I think, if you're looking at people in USA at least. How you carry yourself and how nobody feels insecure. There's some misconfusion, I think, about what is really confidence, what is really self-esteem, and how apparently secure women make insecure men insecure, or men feel insecure, or how confidence among women comes across as attitude, etc. All of that bullshit notions, all of those bullshit notions. If anyone has those notions, just check out that podcast for a reference. Okay, the anchor, I mean the host of the podcast, is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, gets hired by probably the greatest MMA fighter of all time, George St. Pierre, to teach him to how to put in more power and more kinetic energy into his roundhouse kicks. Who is also a stand-up comedian, who is also a former serial actor, former action reality show TV host, and also an MMA commentator himself. That guy is a podcast host. The other podcast host is a retired Navy SEAL and has written multiple best-selling books for children as well as for adults, and now is a business consultant for multiple Fortune 500 companies. And the other is Tulsi Gabbard. See how those two men and that woman converse, okay, among themselves. But anyway, today, on public demand, we are going to discuss, listen to, react to Vivek Ramaswamy's appearance on Lex Fridman. And it's been a while since I watched a full Vivek Ramaswamy appearance on any podcast. The last one I think I watched was his appearance on Jordan Peterson. So I don't know anything that's been discussed here. It's obviously too long for us to discuss fully. We'll at least skim through some of the core topics. There are timestamps, so we'll look into all of them. Let's see the basic preview of the entire discussion. Oh, it's muted.
The way I would do it, 75% headcount reduction across the board in the federal bureaucracy. Send them home packing. Shut down agencies that shouldn't exist. Rescind every unconstitutional regulation that Congress never passed. In a true self-governing democracy, it should be our elected representatives that make the laws and the rules, not unelected bureaucrats. Merit and equity are actually incompatible. Merit and group quotas are incompatible. You can have one or the other.
And also diversity and equality, diversity and equity, all of these are non-compatible, okay? Are basically oxymorons, okay? It's not even grammatically possible. If you are diverse, it means you are inherently not the same as the other person. And how did you end up being diverse? Because you had some kind of inequalities in something or the other, in your upbringing, in your parents' upbringing, maybe one of your parents' upbringing, maybe one of your great-grandparents' upbringing, or maybe a little bit of a difference in their wealth growing up, or a bit of a child nutrition, okay? or a bit of a difference in where you grew up, the water in that particular area. I'm of course concentrating too much on health and nutrition here, but even let's say the perfect teacher, there might be bad teachers in the best schools, there might be one good teacher in one school, or one terrible school, terrible government school, and the vice versa is also possible. So who the fuck knows what all things? There's an infinite, possibly an infinite, no, it's probably, it's not actually an infinite number of things, but for a human being or a group of human beings to count, how did you end up being the exact person you are because of what all effects, those things can't be equalized. So there can't be sameness among any two people. So things will be inherently unequal in every fucking thing. Okay, you all may be equal in some things, but you'll always be unequal in other things. So that's what makes you diverse. That's what makes a group of friends interesting. That kind of diversity, that okay, you have this to teach or share with the other person, and that person has something else to share with you. Okay, that something else, you're not the ditto copy paste person, copy paste version of another person. These are diversities. Okay, these are interesting things, but they are not equity nor equality. Now of course, some commie may say that we are talking about just equality of parental wealth or something, maybe just that. Okay, and the diversity I'm talking about is probably just horizontal diversity, not vertical, or horizontal inequality, not vertical. Not really. Even that horizontal inequality or lack of sameness, even in the horizontal plane, is based on different vertical unequal things only. Okay, again, in your upbringing, the water in your place, how much child nutrition you got, or what kind of specific health or wealth differences were there in your ancestry, all of those things. So anyway, and by the way, NatCon, that conference, okay, National Conservatism, there where our Dr. Swapan Das Gupta went. So there, Vivek's speech on national libertarianism, that is my personal, let's say, manifesto for a economic vision of my country as well. Of course, no one's going to listen to him as well, not the crazy anarcho-capitalist libertarians, nor the establishment. So it's not like I'm parroting some American propaganda talking point, but that's just Vivek's view, which I agree with. And I can't really say that it's the best or it's the most moral way to run a country. No, moral judgments have no point really, because everyone thinks their point of view or their argument is the most moral one. So I'm not going to say it's what good people would argue, or it's the best way to do good for everyone. But I won't go up that moral high horse. But I think it's the most effective way to run a country, the way he proposes it. We have discussed that as well from our live streams. Check it out if you want, or you can check out his speech itself. But if we don't take if we take the morality out of the discussion here, just because I'm playing nice, otherwise I could easily claim that is the only moral way to run a country. But even if we don't talk about morals here, that's, I think, the most effective and fruitful way forward.
You can't have both. It's an assault and a crusade on the nanny state itself.
Nanny state, also known as the Ashokan state in India.
And that nanny state presents itself in several forms. There's the entitlement state, that's the welfare state, presents itself in the form of the regulatory state, that's what we're talking about. And then there's the foreign nanny state, where effectively we are subsidizing other countries that aren't paying their fair share of protection or other resources we provide them. If I was to summarize my ideology in a nutshell, it is to terminate the nanny state in the United States of America in all of its forms: the entitlement state, the regulatory state, and the foreign policy nanny state. Once we've done that, we've revived the republic that I think would make George Washington proud.
Yeah, and when he says dismantling the regulatory state, he does not mean zero regulation for anything and everything. Okay, if you read his book Woke Inc. or Capitalist Punishment, you'll realize what he's talking about. He's talking about, obviously, too much regulation, or regulation by people whose jobs will go on for 40 years, 50 years, but governments are coming and going, and none of those people have any say. It's the bureaucrats who are running everything. That kind of a regulation, or that kind of a regulatory system run by such people, those are the people he's talking about.
The following is a conversation with Vivek Ramaswamy about the future of conservatism in America. He has written, you are one of the great elucidators of conservative ideas, so you're the perfect person to ask, what is conservatism? What's your, let's say, conservative vision for America?
Well, actually, this is one of my criticisms of the modern Republican Party and direction of the conservative movement, is that we've gotten so good at describing what we're against. There's a list of things that we could rail against: wokeism, transgender ideology, climate ideology, COVIDism, COVID policies, the radical Biden agenda, the radical Harris agenda. The list goes on. But actually, what's missing in the conservative movement right now is what we actually stand for. What is our vision for the future of the country? And I saw that
I think it's very, very, very similar to India's situation here as well.
as a deficit at the time I started my presidential campaign. It was in many ways the purpose of my campaign, because I do feel that that's why we didn't have the red wave in 2022. So they tried to blame Donald Trump. They tried to blame abortion. They blamed a bunch of individual specific.
Yeah, and actually a lot of people blamed abortion to such an extent that they thought, okay, it's done. Abortion will forever be an issue. Let's just run away from the abortion issue once and for all. That's why Nikki Haley was basically jumping on the democratish bandwagon to such an extent when she was debating in her primaries, which now everyone realizes abortion was not that big of a deal. Otherwise, Trump would not have won so vehemently.
Big issues or factors. I think the real reason we didn't have that red wave was that we got so practiced at criticizing Joe Biden that we forgot to articulate who we are and what we stand for. So what do we stand for?
Yeah, remember the criticism Vivek was also getting during the primaries debates that why aren't you attacking Joe Biden enough? You know, Joe Biden has done this, Joe Biden has done that, as if like just before 2020 everything was absolutely fine in USA.
As conservatives, I think we stand for the ideals that we fought the American Revolution for in 1776. Ideals like merit, right? That the best person gets the job without regard to their genetics. That you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character. Free speech and open debate, not just as some sort of catchphrase, but the idea that any opinion, no matter how heinous, you get to express it in the United States of America. Self-governance, and this is a big one right now, is that the people we elect to run the government, they're no longer the ones who actually run the government. We in the conservative movement, I believe, should believe in restoring self-governance, where it's not bureaucrats running the show, but actually elected representatives. And then the other ideal that the nation was founded on that I think we need to revive, and I think is a North Star of the conservative movement, is restoring the rule of law in this country. You think about even the abandonment of the rule.
Yeah, also similar, very, very similar to India. A lot of people think we need new laws, we need a fundamental change to the constitution, etc., to run a better country or to make some improvements in the country. But the problem is the improvements most people want, both in USA and in India, based on which they think we need a new constitution or different laws, etc. Those same things are already, most of them are already in law. They are just not enforced. Countless such examples. And why it's not enforced, of course, there's the question of whether conservatism is actually enough. And Vivek might like to call it conservatism. I would say they have won because of the social justice nature of it, that pointing out the injustice that's happening to American society as a whole. Okay, about 14,000 kids have been genetically whose genitals have been mutilated essentially, or have been castrated, their breasts have been cut off, etc. Okay, those kinds of things. And people don't want that to happen anymore, or want retribution or justice for those kinds of things. That's social justice, according to me.
Rule of law at the southern border. It's particularly personal to me as the kid of legal immigrants to this country. You and I actually share a couple of aspects.
So, the reason that those points don't get through, okay, that why is the country in such a bad spot? Okay, the messaging that needs to go through, that can't happen on the basis of conservatism, which is conservatism, i.e., let's say we have a great society, we must protect it, or we used to have a great culture, let's get back to that. That is just not enough. That just doesn't push the needle far enough, okay? It's because of believing in those things that Republicans were losing to such an extent for so many years. It's when Trump came up with a retribution sort of a model that, you see, you all are doing such bad stuff directly here, and we are going to seek justice for those particular things. It's not because America was founded on nice principles. No, you are doing bad things to us right now. Therefore, we are going to do something else. So narrative victory again is required.
In common in that regard. That also, though, means your first act of entering this country can't break the law. So there's some policy commitments and principles: merit, free speech, self-governance, rule of law. And then I think culturally, what does it mean to be a conservative? Is it means we believe in the anchors of our identity, in truth, the value of the individual, family, nation, and God, beat race, gender, sexuality, and climate, if we have the courage to actually stand for our own vision. And that's a big part of what's been missing.
Right. It's not going to happen. Those laws are not going to be enforced because of those things. Because of those things, social justice war played by the other side which takes precedence over your idea of how great your country or society is or used to be, which needs conserving. No, you have to point out what's going wrong, and we are going to rectify those things.
And it's a big part of not just through the campaign, but through a lot of my future advocacy. That's the vacuum I'm aiming to fill.
Yeah, we'll talk about each of those issues. Immigration, the growing bureaucracy of government, religion is a really interesting topic, something you've spoken about a lot. But you've also had a lot of really tense debates. So you're a perfect person to ask to steel man the other side.
Yeah.
So let me ask you about progressivism. Can you
Sure.
steel man the case for progressivism and left-wing ideas?
Yeah. So look, I think the strongest case, particularly for left-wing ideas in the United States, so in the American context, is that the country has been imperfect in living up to its ideals. So even though our founding fathers preached the importance of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and freedom, they didn't practice those values in terms of many of our founding fathers being slave owners, inequalities with respect to women, and other disempowered groups, such that they say that that created a power structure in this country that continues to last to this day. The vestiges of what happened even in 1860 in the course of human history isn't that long ago, and that we need to do everything in our power to correct for those imbalances in power in the United States. That's the core view of the modern left. I'm not criticizing it right now. I'm steelmanning it. I'm trying to give you, I think, a good articulation of why the left believes they have a compelling case for the government stepping in to correct for historical or present inequalities. I can give you my counter rebuttal of that, but the best statement of the left, I think that it's the fact that we've been imperfect in living up to those ideals. In order to fix that, we're going to have to take steps that are severe steps, if needed, to correct for those historical inequalities before we actually have true equality of opportunity in this country. That's the case for the left-wing view in modern America.
So what's your criticism of that?
So my concern with it is, even if that's well-motivated, I think that it recreates many of the same problems that they were
Yeah.
setting out to solve. I'll give you a really tangible example of
Notice how similar this is to the caste-based reservation discussion in India.
that in the present right now. I may be alone amongst prominent conservatives who would say something like this right now, but I think it's true, so I'm going to say it. I'm actually, even in the last year and a half, seeing actually a rise in anti-Black and anti-minority racism in this country, which is a little curious. Right when, over the last 10 years, we got as close to Martin Luther King's promised land as you could envision. A place where you have every American, regardless of their skin color, able to vote without obstruction. A place where you have people able to get the highest jobs in the land without race standing in their way. Why are we seeing that resurgence? In part, it's because of, I believe, that left-wing obsession with racial equity over the course of the last 20 years in this country. And so when you take something away from someone based on their skin color, and that's what correcting for prior injustice was supposed to do. The left-wing views are to correct for prior injustice by saying that whether you're white, straight, cis man, you have certain privileges that you have to actually correct for. When you take something away from somebody based on their genetics, you actually foster greater animus towards other groups around you. And so the problem with that philosophy is that it creates, there are several problems with it, but the most significant problem that I think everybody can agree we want to avoid is to actually fan the flames of the very divisions that you supposedly wanted to heal. I see that in our context.
So well said, so well articulated. This is almost a verbatim, word for word, a description of caste-based reservations in India.
Our immigration policy as well. You think about even what's going on I'm from Ohio. I was born and raised in Ohio and I live there today. The controversy in Springfield, Ohio. I personally don't blame really any of the people who are in Springfield, either the native people who are born and raised in Springfield or even the Haitians who have been moved to Springfield. But it ends up becoming a divide and conquer strategy and outcome where if you put 20,000 people in a community where 50,000 people where the 20,000 are coming in, don't know the language, are unable to follow the traffic laws, are unable to assimilate, you know there's going to be a reactionary backlash. And so even though that began perhaps with some type of charitable instinct, right? Some type of sympathy for people who went through the earthquake in 2010 in Haiti and achieved temporary protective status in the United States, what began with sympathy, what began with earnest intentions, actually creates the very division and reactionary response that supposedly we say we wanted to avoid. So that's my number one criticism of that left-wing worldview. Number two is I do believe that merit and equity are actually incompatible. Merit and group quotas are incompatible. You can have one or the other. You can't have both.
Yes.
And the reason why is...
although, to be fair to commies, Vivek is probably speaking to blank air here because commies admit that it's not about merit. What's the point of merit? Who gives a shit about merit? Because just because you want your country to prosper and progress, or maybe you want to, let's say, protect your generational privileges and wealth forever and after, that doesn't mean you keep someone else down today who maybe just needs a little bit of a helping hand. So fuck merit. But the problem is they don't realize that in a system where merit is not appreciated, first of all, of course, the meritorious people leave. But secondly, that leaves behind such a shitty situation where nobody is good at any fucking thing, in such a situation, who benefits least or who gets fucked the most in a situation where nobody knows how to do anything really well? Okay, the rich person in any society will have a nicer life than anybody else. So imagine a situation where your taxi driver can't drive properly, where your taxi is not maintained properly, it gives off black smoke. Your Uber driver can't follow fucking basic address instructions properly. Your Swiggy rider can't follow basic instructions. The police officer is too unfit to protect you from any violence. The local bureaucrat is a fucking nut job. Okay, who faces the brunt of these things? Shah Rukh Khan, Suhana Khan, or the lower middle class, or the lowest class? So you see, lack of merit or prioritizing any fucking thing other than merit is never a solution. It always turns out way, way, way worse for the most underprivileged in the society anyway.
No two people, and I think it's a beautiful thing. It's true between you and I, between you, I, and all of our friends or family or strangers or neighbors or colleagues. No two people have the same skill sets.
Right.
We're each endowed by different gifts.
Right.
We're each endowed with different,
and which were created because of different kinds of inequalities in their health, wealth, upbringing of their parents, upbringing of their grandparents, everything. Probably an infinite
talents.
number of things.
And that's the beauty of human diversity.
Right.
And a true meritocracy is a system in which you're able to achieve the maximum of your God-given potential without anybody standing in your way. But that means necessarily there's going to be differences in outcomes
Yes.
in a wide range of parameters, not just financial, not just money, not just
Right.
fame or currency or whatever it is. There's just going to be different outcomes for different people in different spheres of lives.
Yes.
And that's what meritocracy demands. It's what it requires. And so the left's vision of group equity necessarily comes at the cost of meritocracy. And so those would be my two reasons for opposing the view. Is one is it's not meritocratic, but number two is it often even has the effect of hurting the very people
Exactly.
they claimed to have wanted to help. And I think
Yes.
that's part of what we're seeing in modern America.
Yeah, you had a pretty intense debate with Mark Cuban. A great conversation. I think it's on your podcast,
Yeah.
actually. Yes. Yeah, it was
He's a good guy
great.
to
It was
talk
great. Okay, well, speaking of good guys, he messages me all the time with beautifully eloquent criticism. I appreciate that, Mark. What was one of the more convincing things he said to you? You're mostly focused on kind of DEI.
So let's just take a step back and understand, because people use these acronyms and then they
To be fair, remember guys, DEI is still at least better than reservation because there is a difference. Okay, DEI was a bunch of private companies getting together and thinking that, okay, this fuck merit, let's just get the most most minority in any category to do the job, and maybe we'll pass off as virtuous by doing that. Maybe we have spilled oil somewhere, or maybe our local bosses got caught raping someone. We'll just say, but see, here's a different branch of the office where we have put a black transgender Muslim disabled woman as the head, so we are a nice company. There was a bit of that as well, but all of that started based on the reservation affirmative action sort of an idea, which are things hard coded into law. Okay, that was emulated or simulated by the private industries in especially movies and stuff. And now you see sort of a rollback of DEI in movies already, especially since Top Gun Maverick became such a gigantic hit, and one after the other, every DEI prioritizing film or web series has gone to fucking hell. Okay, so you see, just like the market operates according to, at the end of the day, more or less acceptability of an idea in the market, for that very reason, even DEI is getting rolled back. But legal affirmative action or hard-coded legal things like caste-based reservations in India, those things are not going to go away just because it gives anyone bad results. Okay, they are going to go on unless you fight a long legal battle against those things, like they did against affirmative action in the USA. Here, the discussion hasn't even begun. Okay, so you see, even on that front, capitalism-induced DEI is still better than government-enforced reservation.
start saying it out of muscle memory and stop asking what it actually means. Like DEI refers to capital D, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a philosophy adopted by institutions, principally in the private sector, companies, nonprofits, and universities, to say that they need to strive for specific forms of racial, gender, and sexual orientation.
Kaladin, good question. I want to respond to this. So he's asking, I wonder if Rajiv Malhotra has had a chance to speak to this guy. I would say that even if they have, you will never know about it, because Vivek can't go public with these things, because the headlines next day will, of course, from the leftist media, will be that Vivek Ramaswamy meets with Hindu nationalist, Hindu supremacist old man. Okay. And the problem you all know with people like Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, they follow fucking commie outlets of India. So they will also Google up, who the fuck is Rajiv Malhotra? Oh my God, a Hindu nationalist guy. So they will think that, okay, Vivek, maybe he has hidden dreams of making USA a Hindu Rashtra. Okay, maybe, just maybe. So they can't have that. And more importantly, yeah, I know, just wondering, yes. So there are still sort of a negligible minority of people among the right-wingers of USA who are still bothered about Hindus being devil worshippers. Remember that guy? People were asking me to react to it, but I did not react to that guy directly saying to Vivek that you are a fucking devil worshipper, because of two things. One, Vivek handled it really well. He was pretty harsh. He was not saying that. He did not play nice with that guy at all. He pushed back really as politely as you can in a public forum, and without being someone from a different religion where you will chop off heads and stuff. But more importantly, that guy who put forward that question shot himself in the foot. He said Thomas Jefferson is an enemy of the state for USA. Okay, because Vivek brought up Thomas Jefferson. So any American who says Thomas Jefferson is an enemy of the idea of USA has no legs to stand on criticizing Hinduism or Vivek Ramaswamy. So who gives a fuck?
Orientation diversity. And it's not just the D, it's the equity in ensuring that you have equal outcomes as measured by certain group quota targets or group representation targets that they would meet in their ranks. Now, the problem with the DEI agenda is, in the name of diversity, it actually has been a vehicle for sacrificing true diversity of thought. So the way the argument goes is this, is that we have to create an environment that is receptive to minorities and minority views. But if certain opinions are themselves deemed to be hostile to those minorities, then you have to exclude those opinions in the name of the capital D diversity. But that means that you're necessarily sacrificing actual diversity of thought. I can give you a very specific example. That might sound like, okay, well, is it such a bad thing if an organization doesn't want to exclude people who are saying racist things on a given day? We could debate that. But let's get to the tangible world of how that actually plays out. I, for my part, have not really heard in ordinary America people...
That is the difference. That is how your thinking, entire mental frame, mental constitution changes after you read a few Thomas Sowell books. Nice ideas versus how do they end up working in the real world scenarios? Okay, second order, third order consequences of your actions. Okay, 20 years later, 30 years later, what's going to happen because of your goddamn idea?
Racial epithets if you're going to a restaurant or in the grocery store. It's not something I've encountered, certainly not in the workplace. But that's a theoretical case. Let's talk about the real world case of how this plays out. So there was an instance, it was a case that presented itself before the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, one of the government enforcers of the DEI agenda. And there was a case of a woman who wore a red sweater on Fridays in celebration of veterans and those who had served the military, and invited others in the workplace to do the same thing. And they had a kind of affinity group. You could call it that, a veteran type affinity group, appreciating those who had served. Her son had served as well. There was a minority employee at that business who said that he found that to be a microaggression. So the employer asked her to stop wearing said clothes to the office. Well, she still felt like she wanted to celebrate. I think it was Friday was the day of the week where they did it. She still wore the red sweater. She didn't wear it, but she would hang it on the back of her seat, right? Put it on the back of her seat at the office. They said, no, you can't do that either. So the irony is, in the name of this capital D diversity, which is creating a supposedly welcome.
This is a little different to India's scenario, in not exactly in the same way, of course. So we never really went away from nationalism that far, at least not in rhetoric, to such a situation where maybe if you are remotely proud of your veterans or the Indian Army, that you would get scrutinized in your office. But it was almost about to happen, and I think it has been nipped in the bud because of Trump's victory and rise of a new right in India as well, which is I had a great friend ever since I was in class in the 7th or 8th standard. Okay, he has become a transgender girl now, but the very first song I released after turning a right-winger was that song I played in a live stream a few days back at the beginning, which was my sort of a dedication. It was that song was created in dedication to the elite forces of the Indian Army. Okay, Para SF, Marcos, etc., and Garud. So when that song released, that's when he said that, yeah, the song is nice, but I can't really stand the topic. So I said, why can't you stand the topic? Because I know what his arguments are, and I have made those made that song. I had made that song regardless of those arguments, because his argument would, of course, be that Indian army has committed rapes allegedly in Kashmir and Northeast, etc. And therefore, now you can't make a song. Apparently, how does that such an argument work? Okay, so since you all are especially going to go on saying that hashtag not all ... So why can't that hashtag not all apply to the Indian army, especially in the para SF? So he said that no. Para SF as an entire group is blamable, and we can't afford to have any respect for para SF if we want to prevent such rapes in future, or get those victims of rape, past rapes, justice forever and after. So I said that, bro, you are a huge fan of the idea of giving away Kashmir. You have said to me before I turned a right winger that because I was just a curious, humble guy, since they were presidency educated, so I thought maybe they know better than me. So I had asked them while I was a left winger that, okay, if Kashmir is given away, who's going to protect it? Because it's going to be a tiny ass country with Pakistan on one side and India on one side. Who takes care of it then? Because Pakistan is going to try to swallow it. So he said that it's India's responsibility to protect its cute little tiny neighbor. So even if you want that kind of protection for that cute little tiny neighbor, who's that going to be done by? Not para SF. So why not make a song just to celebrate them? And that's when sort of a verbal spat broke out, and we have not spoken since.
Workplace for all kinds of Americans. By focusing only on certain kinds of so-called diversity, that translates into actually not even a diversity of your genetics, which is what they claim to be solving for, but also a hostility to diversity of thought. And I think that's dangerous. And you're seeing that happen in the last 4 years across this country. It's been pretty rampant. I think it leaves America worse off. The beauty of America is we're a country where we should be able to have institutions that are stronger from different points of view being expressed. But my number one criticism of the DEI agenda is not even that it's anti-meritocratic. It is anti-meritocratic. But my number one criticism is it's actually hostile to the free and open exchange of ideas by creating often legal liabilities for organizations that even permit certain viewpoints to be expressed. And I think that's...
I know you live in Gujarat or USA. Come back to Kolkata. Come to Kolkata. Don't need to come back to Kolkata. Come to Kolkata if you think Vivek's ideas are bad.
The biggest concern.
I think what Mark would say is that diversity allows you to look for talent in places where you haven't looked before, and therefore find really special talent, special people. I think that's the case he made.
He did make that case, and it was a great conversation. And my response to that is, great, that's a good thing. We don't need a 3-letter acronym to do that, right? You don't need special programmatic DEI incentives to do it, because companies are always going to seek in a truly free market, which I think we're missing in the United States today for a lot of reasons. But in a truly free market, companies will have the incentive to hire the best and brightest, or else they're going to be less competitive versus other companies. But you don't need ESG, DEI, CSR regimes in part enforced by the government to do it. Today, to be a government contractor, for example, you have to adopt certain racial and gender representation targets in your workforce. That's not the free market working. So I think you can't have it both ways. Either it's going to be good for companies and companies are going to do what's in their self-interest. That's what capitalists like Mark Cuban and I believe. But if we really believe that, then we should let the market work rather than forcing it to adopt these top-down standards. That's my issue with it.
I don't know what it is about human psychology, but whenever you have a sort of administration, a committee that gets together to do a good thing, the committee starts to use the good thing, the ideology behind which there's a good ideal, to bully people and to do bad things. I don't know what it is.
This has less to do with left-wing versus right-wing ideology, and more the nature of a bureaucracy is one that looks after its own existence as its top goal. So, so part of what you've seen...
Which is why you see, of course, we call them Hindutva socialists, but so many on the Hindutva side support a gigantic bureaucracy.
With the so-called perpetuation of wokeness in American life is that the bureaucracy has used...
The argument will be, do you know how tough an exam my father gave to pass that exam of UPSC? Do you know how tough an exam I am giving right now? Do you know what an evil thing Sanjeev Sanyal is?
The appearance of virtue to actually deflect accountabilities for its own failure. So you've seen that in several different spheres of American life. You could even talk about it in the military, right? You think about our entry into Iraq after 9/11 had nothing to do with the stated objectives that we had. And I think by all accounts, it was a policy move we regret. Our policy ranks and our foreign policy establishment made a mistake in entering Iraq, invading a country that really, by all accounts, was not at all responsible for 9/11. Nonetheless, if you're part of the US military or you're General Mark Milley, you would rather talk about white rage or systemic racism than you would actually talk about the military's actual substantive failures. It's what I call the practice of blowing woke smoke to deflect accountability. You say the same thing with respect to the educational system. It's a lot easier to claim that, and I'm not the one making this claim, but others have made this claim, that math is racist because there are inequitable results on objective tests of mathematics based on different demographic attributes.
Right.
You can claim using that math is racist. It's a lot easier to blow that woke smoke than it is.
And it is the logical, let's say, extension of the argument of merit is not important. It matters that someone gets a helping hand based on even lack of skills or knowledge or intelligence even. Just because they have a life of a bit of a more suffering than, maybe not even bit of a more suffering, maybe a lot more suffering than someone else who is more qualified for the job. And so 2 plus 2 is not equal to 4, because someone who's grown up poorer might write 2 plus 2 is equal to 5, and therefore they should get marks even for that. What happens when he becomes a driver or a pilot? Okay, a rich man will have his own pilot, maybe for his own plane, who's going to travel in the plane flown by the guy who wrote 2 plus 2 is equal to 5 and got full marks in his maths test. Okay, again, the relatively poorer guy always suffers because of a policy which started out as with the intention to benefit poorer people.
Is to accept accountability for failing to teach Black kids in the inner city how to actually do math and fix our public school systems and the zip coded mechanism for trapping kids in poor communities.
And which can't happen, of course. It can't happen because of their insane teachers unions. Like there are stats after stats that show that they spend way more per student in public schools in those ghetto neighborhoods where education is insanely bad than the government spends in even charter schools, which produce way better results for students, way better students.
In bad schools. So I think that in many cases, what these bureaucracies do is they use the appearance of signaling this virtue as a way of not really advancing a social cause,
right?
But it's strengthening the power of the bureaucracy itself.
See how is it similar to the exact situation of caste reservations in India? Okay, lower castes are still lower castes who are still apparently facing oppression from upper castes, or mainly Brahmins. Okay, so how? Why didn't reservations work, bro? So let's do something else. No. But the people who now get their salaries to further the reservation agenda or to handle the paperwork of reservations, what are they going to do? Un logo ka kya hoga? So I had a journalism professor back in 2011-12 in college. That's when the very first little smells of the farm bills were coming into the discourse. Okay, so someone had casually asked that why isn't this farm bill being brought in? Okay, why isn't this being enforced? Of course, not knowing much about it, it was just a curious question. Why isn't this happening? So she said, what will happen to the middlemen? What about their professions? What will they feed their kids? Okay, so what will the babu feed his kids?
And insulating that bureaucracy from criticism. So in many ways, bureaucracy.
Shaptoshi, blacks can't adopt homeschooling. Who's going to teach them in their homes? Their single motherhood is about 75%. And their mothers don't know any fucking thing except collecting a food stamp, let's say, giveaway. Who will teach them in home?
I think, carves the channels through which much of this woke ideology has flowed over the last several years. And that's why part of my focus has shifted away from just combating wokeness, because that's just a symptom, I think, versus combating actual bureaucracy itself, the rise of this managerial class, the rise of the deep state. We talk about that in the government, but the deep state doesn't just exist in the government.
Instead of rising income inequality, instead of bothering about rising income inequality, bother about the rising of the bureaucratic state
of our lives, from companies to nonprofits to universities. It's the rise of, you call the managerial class, the committee class, the people who professionally sit on committees, I think are wielding far more power today than actual creators, entrepreneurs, original ideators, and ordinary citizens alike.
Yeah, you need managers, but as few as possible. It seems like when you have a giant managerial class, the actual doers don't get.
Yeah, there's a saying in Bengali: "Odhik sadhute gajon noshto, odhik sonnyassite gajon noshto." Okay, so if everyone's a manager, what the fuck are they going to manage?
To do, but like you said, bureaucracy is a phenomenon of both the left and the right. This is not.
It's not even a left or right. It just transcends that. But it's anti-American at its core. So our founding fathers, they were anti-bureaucratic at their core. Actually, they were the pioneers, the explorers, the unafraid. Right? They were the inventors, the creators. People forget this about Benjamin Franklin, who signed the Declaration of Independence, one of the great inventors that we have in the United States as well. He invented the lightning rod. He invented the Franklin stove, which was actually one of the great innovations of in the field of thermodynamics. He even invented a number of musical instruments that Mozart and Beethoven went on to use. That's just Benjamin Franklin. So you think, oh, he's a one-off. Everybody think, okay, he was the one zany founder who was also a creative scientific innovator who happened to be one of the founders of the country. Wrong. It wasn't unique to him. You have Thomas Jefferson. What are you sitting in right now? You're sitting on a swivel chair.
Mhm.
Okay. Who invented the swivel chair?
Thomas Jefferson?
Yes, Thomas Jefferson. Funny
Yeah.
enough, he invented the swivel chair
Yeah.
while he was writing the Declaration of Independence.
You're the one that
insane.
reminded me that he wrote the Declaration of Independence when he was 33.
And he was 33 when he did it, while inventing the swivel chair.
I like how you're focused on the swivel chair. Can we just pause on the Declaration of Independence? It makes me feel horrible.
The Declaration of Independence part, everybody knows. What people don't know, he was an architect. So he worked in Virginia, but the Virginia State Capitol Dome, so the building that's in Virginia today, where the state capitol is, that dome was actually designed by Thomas Jefferson as well. So these people weren't people who sat on professional committees. They weren't bureaucrats. They hated
Right.
bureaucracy.
They were doers. But you see, to be fair again, it's just a law of nature, law of humanity, that after a significant social upheaval or political upheaval, the people who carry forward their ideas are bureaucrats. But okay, fair enough. Some of those ideas need to go on in safe hands, maybe in a coddled up way for a few years, maybe. You can't have disruptions and political upheavals all the fucking time. But when that bureaucracy, when that coddling has gone on too much and you come up with bad results after bad results for decades and decades, then it's time for a gigantic disruption again. The kind of which can't happen unless they fire all of their bureaucrats, or like at least 75%, like Vivek suggests. That's what is required of America today, and which we as Indians hope that they don't do, because what if they get strong and actually become a fantastic and prosperous country again, and a few decades later another crazy fuck like Dick Cheney becomes the president, maybe? What then? So let them destroy themselves.
Part of old world England was committed to the idea of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy and monarchy go hand in hand. A monarch can't actually administer or govern directly. It requires a bureaucracy, a machine, to actually technocratically govern for him.
Right.
So the United States of America was founded on the idea that we reject that old world view. Right? The old world vision.
But this idea that we will reject the worldview and put forward this new view, even to further that interest, they needed bureaucrats, of course.
Was that we, the people, cannot be trusted to self-govern or make decisions for ourselves. We would burn ourselves off the planet, is the modern version of this, with existential risks like global climate change, if we just leave it to the people and their democratic will. That's why you need professional technocrats, educated elites, enlightened bureaucrats to be able to set the limits that actually protect people from their own worst impulses. That's the old world view. And most nations in human history have operated this way. But what made the United States of America itself, to know what made America great, we have to know what made America itself. What made America itself is we said hell no to that vision, that we, the people, for better or worse, are going to self-govern without the committee class restraining what we do. And the likes of Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, and I could give you examples of John Adams or Robert Livingston. You could go straight down the list of founding fathers who were inventors, creators, pioneers, explorers.
Again, my recommendation for the 100th time, guys, please, 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 if you have above average reading skills in the English language, do read something called the Federalist Papers. Your knowledge of war strategy, nation building, political science, human psychology, psychology of in general society, all of that will increase fivefolds, and you will, let's say, just have a better understanding of humanity, and maybe a better grasp on the English language, how to articulate an argument even. Okay.
Who also were the very people who came together to sign the Declaration of Independence. And so, yeah, this rise of bureaucracy in America in every sphere of life, I view it as anti-American, actually. And I hope that, conservatives and liberals alike can get behind my crusade, certainly, to get in there and shut most of it down.
Yeah, speaking of shutting most of it down, how do you propose we do that? How do we make government more efficient? How to make it
Maybe not. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of shutting most of it down, how do you propose we do that? How do we make government more efficient? How do we make it smaller? What are the different ideas of how to do that?
Well, the first thing I would say is you're always taking a risk. Okay, there's no free lunch here, mostly at least. You're always taking a risk. One risk is that you say, I want to reform it gradually. I want to have a grand master plan and get to exactly what the right end state is, and then carefully cut with a chisel, like a work of art, to get there. I don't believe that approach works. I think that's an approach that conservatives have taken for many years. I think it hasn't gotten us very far. And the reason is, if you have like an 8-headed hydra and you cut off one of the heads, it grows right back.
Yeah.
The other risk you could take, so that's the risk of not cutting enough. The other risk you could take is the risk of cutting too much. To say that I'm going to cut so much that I'm going to take the risk of not just cutting the fat, but also cutting some muscle along the way, that I'm going to take that risk. I can't give you option C, which is to say that I'm going to cut exactly the right amount. I'm going to do it perfectly. Okay, you don't know ex ante. You don't know beforehand that it's exactly how it's going to go. So that's a meaningless claim. It's only a question of which risk you're going to take. I believe in the moment we live in right now, the second risk is the risk we have to be willing to take. And we haven't had a class of politician. I mean, Donald Trump in 2016 was, I think, the closest we've gotten. And I think the second term will be even closer to what we need. But short of that, I don't think we've really had a class of politician who has gotten very serious about cutting so much that you're also going to cut some fat, but not only some fat, but also some muscle. That's the risk we have to take. So the way I would do it, 75% headcount reduction across the board in the federal bureaucracy, send them home packing, shut down agencies that shouldn't exist, rescind every unconstitutional regulation that Congress never passed. In a true self-governing democracy, it should be our elected representatives that make the laws and the rules, not unelected bureaucrats. And that is the single greatest form of economic stimulus we could have in this country, but it is also the single most effective way to restore self-governance in our country as well. And it is the blueprint for, I think, how we save this country.
That's pretty good.
Well, Anujla and Shamiti, yes, Thomas Well is becoming more and more popular among a bunch of Indian right-wingers. There's one problem I've seen with it so far, which is that they were hardcore statists and commie socialists, and then they look at two Thomas Well videos and straight directly jump to, why is BJP so socialist and communist? Therefore, I'll oppose it. Okay, bro. Things take a bit of a time, and it's a incremental change is always the reality of the day. You're not going to have in a society trained to be socialists, to like the bureaucracy, to have respect for the bureaucracy, to ask, to say for each and every fucking thing in their lives that why isn't the government doing something for this? The government must do something for this, etc. For that entire population, one fine morning you can't have Thomas Well or Vivek Ramaswamy ideas, but it's our job who've understood the game to keep on furthering these ideas, at least to tell people, to let people know, to make them think that what you think is absolute horseshit. Okay, it's time to think differently. When a lot of people are convinced, then of course better things can happen.
Gangster 75.
What people will start protesting against is not Vivek's concern, shouldn't be anybody's concern, because they will protest against Trump having a dick. Why isn't he a trans woman? So who gives a fuck?
5%. There's this kind of almost meme-like video of Argentinian President Javier Milei.
Afuera.
Where on a whiteboard he has all the, I think, 18 ministries lined up, and he's ripping like the Department of Education gone, and he's just going like this.
Yes.
Now
we need the Department of Minorities gone.
Situation in Argentina is pretty dire, and the situation in the United States is not, despite everybody saying, "Oh, the empire is falling." This is still, in my opinion, the greatest nation on earth. Still, the economy is doing very well. Still, this is the hub of culture, the hub of innovation, the hub of so many amazing things. Do you think it's possible to do something like firing 75% of people in government?
Yes.
When things are going relatively well?
Yes. In fact, I think it's necessary and essential. Yes. I think things depends on what your level of well really is, what you're benchmarking against. America's not built on complacency, right? We're built on the pursuit of excellence. And are we still the greatest nation on planet Earth? I believe we are. I agree with you on that. But are we great as we could possibly be, or even as we have been in the past, measured against our own standards of excellence? No, we're not. I think the nation is in a trajectory of decline. That doesn't mean it's the end of the empire yet. But we are a nation in decline right now. I don't think we have to be. But part of that decline is driven by the rise of this managerial class, the bureaucracy, sucking the lifeblood out of the country, sucking the lifeblood out of our innovative culture, our culture of self-governance. So is it possible? Yeah, it's really possible. I mean, I'll tell you one easy way to do it. This is I'm being a little bit glib here, but I think it's not crazy, at least as a thought experiment. Get in there on day one, say that anybody in the federal bureaucracy who is not elected representatives obviously are elected by the people, but the people who are not elected, If your social security number ends in an odd number, you're out. If it ends in an even number, you're in. There's a 50% cut right there.
The Kejriwal of cutting bureaucracy.
Of those who remain, if your social security number starts in an even number, you're in. And if it starts with an odd number, you're out. Boom. That's a 75% reduction, done literally stochastically. Okay. One of the virtues of that, it's a thought experiment, not a policy.
But do you know what a tough exam my father gave to get that fucking job, you Vivek Ramaswamy, you libertarian?
But one of the virtues of that thought experiment is that you don't have a bunch of lawsuits you're dealing with about gender discrimination or racial discrimination or political viewpoint discrimination. Actually, the reality is you've at mass, you didn't bring the chisel, you brought a chainsaw. I guarantee you, do that on day one and do step 2 on day 2. On day 3, not a thing will have changed for the ordinary American, other than the size of their government being a lot smaller and more restrained, spending a lot less money to operate it. And most people who run a company, especially larger companies, know this. It's 25% of the people who do 80 to 90% of.
Yes, everyone, all of, oh my God, people who say to me that, why do you post so many Thomas Sowell quotes? Don't you have any Indian economist to quote things from? Well, the last one who thought remotely like Thomas Sowell was Chanakya, probably. But at least not that I know of, okay? In today's era, even Sanjeev Sanyal, Harsh Madhusudan, they come only kind of close. And it's not like they are giving out economics discussion quotes for me to take screenshots of anyway. But imagine a Twitter run by Parag Agarwal and Vijaya Gadde, bro. Huh? तब ये weird Indian race prioritization का क्या करते हम? So everyone, all of those idiots said that Twitter is over because so many people got fired. So many, such less amounts of engineers can't run a gigantic company like Twitter. Everyone's been proven wrong. And in the same way, the bureaucracy can also run, even in India, with a lot less people, with a lot less departments.
Of the useful work. These government agencies are no different. So now imagine you could do that same thought experiment, but not just doing it at random, but do it still at large scale while having some metric of screening for those who actually had both the greatest competence as well as the greatest commitment and knowledge of the Constitution. That, I think, would immediately raise not only the civic character of the United States. Now we feel, okay, the people we elect to run the government, they've got the power back. They're running the government again, as opposed to the unelected bureaucrats who wield the power today. It would also stimulate the economy. I mean, the regulatory state is like a wet blanket on the American economy. Most of it's unconstitutional. All we require is leadership with a spine to get in there and actually do what conservative presidents have maybe gestured towards and talked about, but have not really effectuated ever in modern history.
And by the way, that kind of thing would.
And another, Ashkecham, another thing that benefited USA largely was that almost the entire world was decimated in war, and they weren't. So they had a nice sort of a free hand, a beginner's luck even.
Attract the ultra competent that actually want to work in government.
Exactly, which you're missing today. Because right now the government would swallow them up. Most competent people feel like that bureaucratic machine will swallow them whole. You clear the decks of 75% of them, real innovators can then show up.
Yeah, you know, there's kind of this cynical view of capitalism where people think that the only reason you do anything is to earn more money. But I think a lot of people would want to work in government to build something that's helpful to a huge number of people.
Yeah, well, look, I think there's opportunities for the very best to have large.
Ha, bhai, is Jind. He will imagine an insane scenario where Vivek someday decides, India is a better country for me. Let's go there. What's the first thing he's told? Privileged Tamil Brahmin comes back to India to haunt lower castes. So he's going back to USA in the next flight.
Large-scale impact in all kinds of different institutions, in our universities, to K through 12 education, through entrepreneurship. I'm obviously very biased in that regard. I think there's a lot you're able to create that you couldn't create through government. But I do think in the moment that we live in, where our government is as broken as it is and is as responsible for the declining nature of our country, yeah, I think bringing in people who are unafraid, talented, and able to have an impact could make all of the difference. And I agree with you. I don't think actually most people, even most people who say they're motivated by money, I don't think are actually motivated by money.
True. Like in the famous TV show House of Cards, the protagonist said that everything is about sex except sex. And remember, guys, the things, why isn't Vivek in India right now? Why was he born in the USA in the first place? Okay, why were his parents going to USA in the first place? The reasons that kicked his parents out of India or motivated them to leave their country and let's say almost his father spent all of his saving almost every year just to bring his kids every year to Palakkad in Kerala. Okay, why did he have to do that? those reasons, the things that pushed his parents away, those reasons in India have not gone away at all. Okay, so how are we going to have him back, or have anyone like him here?
I think most people are driven by a belief.
AA, if you agree with this, then what's your problem with Vivek Ramaswamy's ideas? If it's impractical, it needs to be shoved down someone's throats.
That they can do more than they're being permitted to do right now with their skill sets. See, I'll tell you that. So I've run a number of companies, and one of the things that I used to ask when I was, I'm not day-to-day involved in them anymore, but as a CEO, I would ask when I did interviews. And the first company I started at Roivant, like for 4 years in, company was pretty big by that point. I would still intend on interviewing every candidate before they joined, screening for the culture of that person. And I can talk a lot more about things we did to build that culture. But one of the questions I would always ask them naturally just to start a conversation, it's a pretty basic question, is why did you leave your last job, or why are you leaving your last job? I'll tell you what I didn't hear very often is that I wasn't paid enough, right? And maybe they'd be shy to tell you that during an interview, but there's indirect ways to signal that. That really wasn't at all like even a top 10 reason why people were leaving their job. I'll give you what the number one reason was, is that they felt like they were unable to do the true maximum of what their potential was in their prior role. That's the number one reason people leave their job. And I think, by the way, I would say that I'm saying that in a self-boastful way that we would attract these people. I think it's also true for most of the people who left the company as well, Roivant, right? And that was true at Roivant, true at other companies I've started. I think the number one reason people join companies, the number one people leave companies, whether they've been to join mine or to leave mine in the past, have been that they feel like they're able to do more than they're able to with their skill set than that environment permits them to actually achieve. And so I think that's what people hung for. When we think about capitalism and true free market capitalism, and we used words earlier like meritocracy, it's about building a system, whether it's in a nation or whether it's even within an organization, that allows every individual to flourish and achieve the maximum of their potential. And sometimes it just doesn't match for an organization where, let's say, the mission is here and somebody's skill sets could be really well.
Saptarshi, this is true, but you see that argument has its limitations, unfortunately, because at some point, BJP is going to become so complacent that, okay, you see, since culture is downstream of power, and since we need to stay in power to do whatever good things you really want the state to do, what if we go away? So keep voting for us no matter what the fuck we do. Okay, that's not out of the purview of possibilities. Okay,
well aligned to a different mission. Then the right answer is it's not a negative thing. It's just that person needs to leave and find their mission somewhere else. But to bring that back to government, I think part of what's happened right now is that the rise of that bureaucracy in so many of these government agencies has actually obfuscated the mission of these agencies. I think if you went to most federal bureaucracies and just asked them, like, what's the mission? I'm just making one up off the top of my head right now. The Department of Health and Human Services. What is the mission of HHS in the United States of America? I doubt somebody who works there, even the person who leads it, could give you a coherent answer to that question. I just heavily doubt it. And you could fill in the blank for any range of the Department of Commerce. I mean, I just could go straight down the list of each of these other ones. What is the mission of this organization? You could say for the U.S. military. What's the purpose of the U.S. military, the Department of Defense? I can give you one. I think it is to win wars, and more importantly, through its strength, to avoid wars. That's it. Well, okay, if that's the mission, then okay, it's not tinkering around and messing around in some foreign conflict where we kind of feel like it sometimes, and other ones where we don't. And who decides that? I don't really know, but whoever the people are that decide that, we follow those orders. No, our mission is to protect the United States of America, to win wars, and to avoid wars. Boom. Those three things. What does protecting the United States of America mean? Number one, the homeland of the United States of America and the people who reside there. Okay, that's a clear mission. I mean, the Department of Health and Human Services maybe could be a reasonable mission to say that I want to make America the healthiest country on planet Earth, and we will develop the metrics and meet those metrics. And that's the goal of the Department of HHS, to set policies, or at least to implement policies that best achieve that goal. But you can't...
I don't honestly believe that Modi ji loves the bureaucracy. I think he's made his peace with it, and that's what I think I've noticed regularly. Anyone who Modi had given hints that he would, any organization or person or kind of people or a group that he would fuck with, he has come to power and tweaked them or used their actions to his benefit or to whatever benefit that can be squeezed out of that group. He doesn't, just because he doesn't decimate a group completely doesn't mean he loves that group. Okay, remember that. Saptarshi is saying true, complacency might get there. I think we should then start infiltrating into the party like the leftists do. And which can't happen without a large-scale awareness of those situations and knowing these things in the first place, okay? Because what does infiltrating BJP today mean? in places where BJP is not in power. Okay, probably you get murdered. What does it mean for you to infiltrate BJP in the places where it is in power? It means you come in the BJP party office the very first day, and you say, you see guys, you all are wrong in economics. I have the greatest ideas. The first thing they are going to think of you, even before you open your mouth, is that, okay, here comes another power hungry guy who probably wants to become sort of a local leader. So now lick our feet, and then maybe in 10 years you'll become a polling booth officer maybe. So how are you going to infiltrate political parties in India?
And maybe that's the right statement of the mission, maybe it's not.
Unless you are so famous and insanely great at something else that someone begs you to join their party, then of course you can influence a little.
But one of the things that happens is when you're governed by the committee class, it dilutes the sense of mission out of any organization, whether it's a company or government agency or bureaucracy. And once you've done that, then you lose the ability to attract the best and the brightest, because in order for somebody to achieve the maximum of their potential, they have to know what it's towards. There has to be a mission in the first place. Then you're not getting the best and brightest. You get more from the committee class, and that becomes a self-perpetuating downward spiral. And that is what the blob of the federal bureaucracy really looks like today.
Yeah, you said something really profound. At the individual scale of the individual contributor, doer, creator, what happens is you have a certain capacity to do awesome shit. And then there's barriers that come up where you have to wait a little bit. This happens, there's friction always. When humans together are working on something, there's friction. And so the goal of a great company is to minimize that friction, minimize the number of barriers. And what happens is the managerial class, the incentive is to create barriers.
That's what it does. I mean, that's just by the nature of a bureaucracy. It creates sand in the gears to slow down whatever the other process was. Is there some room for that somewhere in certain contexts? Sure. It's like a defensive mechanism that's designed to reduce dynamism. But I think when that becomes cancerous in its scope, it then actually kills the host itself, whether that's a school, whether that's a company, whether that's a government. And so the way I think about it, Lex, is there's sort of a balance of distributed power. And I don't mean power in the Foucault sense of social power, but I mean just sort of power in the sense of the ability to effect relevant change in any organization between what you could call the founder class, the creator class, the everyday citizen, the stakeholder class, and then the managerial class. And there's a role for all three of them, right? You could have the constituents of an organization, say in a constitutional republic.
Yeah, Saptarshi, that's going to take 10, 15 years, by which time you'll have some power in your hands already if you want to be a significant person in the party, by which I mean, of course, you will be running a bunch of organizations on the grassroots level. You'll have maybe 30 guys under you who report to you, and where you'll have to execute and follow their socialist policies to the letter. Okay, so are you going to really stay a civilian after 15 years?
The citizen, you could have the equivalent of the creator class, the people who create things in that polity, and then you have the bureaucratic class that's designed to administer and serve as a liaison between the two. I'm not denying that there's some role somewhere for people who are in that managerial class, but right now,
yeah, Anushilan Samiti, why do we have so many organizations, so many government bodies? Because it was meant to keep the spirit of India's decentralized society alive. Okay, that the spirit of that decentralized society was operating on the shoulders of a thing called caste. Okay, those castes in those ways are dead today. What we have are fancy dress competitions, and in West Bengal those castes remain, of course. But on the other hand, the central state is going on getting more and more significant and strong and big and powerful, as is the state government of every state. Okay, so then how are you going to let's say reconcile between all these groups or government bodies which were created to keep it decentralized at the same time when there is centralization going on? That's what's fucking us among the, let's say, top 5 things that's fucking the country
now in this moment in American history. And I think it's been more or less true for the last century, but it's grown, starting with Woodrow Wilson's advent of the modern administrative state, metastasizing through FDR's New Deal and what was required to administer it, blown over and metastasizing further through LBJ's Great Society, and everything that's happened since, even aided and abetted by Republican presidents along the way, like Richard Nixon, has created a United States of America where that committee class, both in and outside the government in our culture, wields far too much influence and power relative to the everyday citizen stakeholder and to the creators who are in many ways constrained, hamstrung, shackled in a straitjacket from achieving the maximum of their own potential contributions. And, I certainly feel that myself. I probably identify as being a member of that creator class most closely. It's just what I've done. I create things.
Yeah.
And I think we live in an environment in the United States of America where we're still probably the best country on earth, where that creator has that shot. So that's the positive side of it. but one where we are far more constrictive to the creator class than we have been when we've been at our best. And that's what I want to see change.
Can you sort of steelman the perspective of somebody that looks at it?
Creators do have some great opportunities today in Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Mumbai, etc. But again, not the entirety of the country, of course.
Particular Department of Education, and are saying that the amount of pain that will be caused by closing it and firing 75% of people will be too much.
Yeah. So,
Rishabh, no, they don't. They listen to Kushal because Kushal comes from a family of BJP party workers or supporters or something, and he has worked as a BJP person himself in the grassroots for about more than a decade. Okay. As for Jaipur dialogues, Sanjay Dixit from time to time, I think, becomes friends with the BJP. For example, let's say 6-7 months before the elections, up until 6-7 months before the elections, 2024, remember how harshly critical he was of the BJP, how he was pointing out every mistake they were making and stuff. Since the election, of course, to be truthful, the government is doing a better job on a lot of fronts. But I think Sanjay Dixit is signaling to the party that I'm okay with being friends with you by hiring that, bringing regularly as a guest that Bengali geopolitics guy, something Payne, okay, Payne, Pothikrit Payne. He works in that organization called Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Foundation, which is I think a BJP leaning or a pro BJP think tank. So I think that's his signal to the BJP that I'm cool with what you're doing. Ajit Bharti, fuck no. They will listen to Ajit Bharti only when Ajit Bharti influences enough people who say fuck you to BJP. They're not going to listen to Ajit Bharti directly. They hate Ajit Bharti.
I go back to this question of mission, right? A lot of people who make arguments for the Department of Education aren't aware why the Department of Education was created in the first place. Actually, so that might be a useful place to start, is that this thing was created. It had a purpose, presumably. What was that purpose? Might be at least a relevant question to ask before we decide what are we doing with it or not. What was the purpose of this thing that we created? It's not it to me seems like a highly relevant question, yet in this discussion about
Buddhadev, very good question. It will. If you disrupt any sort of bad behavior among any kind of a group, because not specific groups, but every group is good or bad in the same way that other groups have been bad or good in history, right? That's the same with casteism, status, etc. So yes, a new committee caste or committee class will come into being. Just like if you dismantle today's caste system, a different caste system is going to appear anyway. So the target is, of course, repeatedly go on with this creative destruction or these disruptions repeatedly every few years, every few decades. Okay, what we have is stagnancy.
Government reform. It's interesting how eager people are to skip over that question and just to talk about, okay, but we got the status quo and it's just going to be disruptive, versus asking the question of, okay, this institution was created. It had an original purpose. Is that purpose still relevant? Is this organization at all fulfilling that purpose today? To me, those are some relevant questions to ask. So let's talk about that for the Department of Education. Its purpose was relevant at that time, which was to make sure that localities and particularly states were not siphoning dollars, taxpayer dollars, away from predominantly black school districts to predominantly white ones. And that was not a theoretical concern at the time. It was happening, or there was at least some evidence that was happening in certain states in the South. And so you may say you don't like the federal solution. You may say you like.
Now, this argument, this similar, exactly this situation has happened in the case of Planned Parenthood. Remember our last discussion in English with Mr. Sociologist, that we were saying that early anthropology, the days of eugenics, okay, black people are bad, etc., or black people are inherently born such idiots, according to those early days of anthropologists, that let's just fuck their population and therefore create these abortion clinics called Planned Parenthood in every black neighborhood, so that the number of black babies decrease. Okay, so today Planned Parenthood in those same neighborhoods exist and their numbers increase for a completely different reason, that black people are so underprivileged that let's get them easy access to abortion. So the action, the end result is exactly the same. It's allegedly based on a different reason. Who knows who's pulling this deep dark strings behind? But anyway, you see, that's exactly what happens with West Bengal's casteism. Okay, what would you expect in a truly casteist state in India? That upper castes are in positions of influence and power in every field, and lower castes are face the unfortunate brunt of deaths in political violence and riots and stuff. That's the exact result of West Bengal. And you see, remember the last day we read Max Weber. religion of India. Max Weber was pointing out how different Brahmins would go up setting about a rule when they saw that when push came to shove, they could not follow those rules themselves. They made a spiritual backdoor, a ritual backdoor to that, so that they could modify their own ways. So you see, setting up Planned Parenthood to kill black babies in the early days of anthropology was one ritual. The ritual backdoor was, let's kill black babies anyway, but it's for their own good. They just require abortion. What can you do? So you see, rituals change all the time.
Like the federal solution, but like it or not, that was the original purpose of the U.S. Department of Education, to make sure that from a federal perspective, states were not systematically disadvantaging black school districts over predominantly white ones. However noble and relevant that purpose may have been 6 decades ago, it's not a relevant purpose today. There's no evidence today of states intentionally mapping out which are the black versus white school districts and siphoning money in one direction versus another. To the contrary, one of the things we've learned is that the school districts in the inner city, many of which are predominantly black, actually spend more money per student than other school districts for a worse result as measured by test scores and other performance on a per student basis, suggesting that there are other factors than the dollar expenditures per school determining student success.
Yeah.
And actually suggesting that even the overfunding of some of those already poorly run schools rewards them for their actual bureaucratic failures.
Yeah. Esgend, not in our lifetimes, because after all, bro, $10,000 per capita GDP and $2,000 what is USA's GDP per capita? I think $90,000 or something, right? So, and we have a $2,400 per capita GDP. With that, you're not going to have those kinds of things, because even today, and it's going to remain so for the foreseeable future, unless Yogi revamps law and order enforcement completely. And to be fair, I am, of course, applying the West Bengal lens to all states here, but the kind of political violence there is in West Bengal, or even the idea of, let's say, student violence, student politics, and a bit of fist fights breaking out here and there, which have started in USA only 2016 onwards. Unless those sorts of things go, we are not going to have ideas-based political parties coming up anytime soon. Yeah, they will, maybe, like the Libertarian Party of India on Twitter. They will put up statuses. They don't have the muscle power on the streets.
So against that backdrop, the Department of Education has instead extrapolated that original purpose of what was a racial equality purpose to instead implement a different vision of racial equity through the ideologies that they demand in the content of the curriculum that these public schools actually teach. So Department of Education funding, so federal funding accounts for about, I'm giving you round numbers here, but around 10% of the funding of most public schools across the country. But that comes with strings attached. So in today's Department of Education, this didn't happen back in 1970, but it's happening today. Ironically, it's funny how these things change with the bureaucracies that fail. They blow smoke to cover up for their own failures. What happens with today's Department of Education?
The ritual backdoor, guys.
They effectively say you don't get that funding unless you adopt certain goals deemed at achieving racial or gender equity goals. And in fact, they also intervene in the curriculum where there's evidence of schools in the Midwest or in the Great Plains that have been denied funding because Department of Education funding, so long as they have certain subjects like archery. There was one instance of a school that had archery in its curriculum. I found that to be pretty interesting, actually. I think you have different kinds of physical education. This is one that combines mental focus with physical aptitude. But hey, maybe I'm biased. Doesn't matter whether you like archery or not. I don't think it's the federal government's job to withhold funding from a school because they include something in their curriculum that the federal government deems inappropriate, where that locality found that to be a relevant locus of education. So what you see then is an abandonment of the original purpose that's long past. You don't have this problem that the Department of Education was originally formed to solve of siphoning money from black school districts to white school districts and laundering that effectively in public funds. That doesn't exist anymore. So they find new purposes instead, creating a lot more damage along the way. So you asked me to steel man it, and can I say something constructive rather than just, pounding down on the other side? One way to think about this is, for a lot of these agencies, were many of them formed with a positive intention at the outset? Yes. Where that positive intention existed, I'm still a skeptic of creating bureaucracies, but if you're going to create one, at least make it, what should we call it?
Small.
A task force. Make it a task force.
Specific.
A task force as an agency means after it's done, you celebrate, you've done your work, pat yourself on the back, and then move on, rather than creating a standing bureaucracy, which actually finds things to do after it has already solved or addressed the first reason it was born in the first place. And I think we don't have enough of that in our culture. Right? I mean, even if you have a company that's generated tons of cash flow and it solved a problem, let's say it's a biopharmaceutical company that developed a cure to some disease, and the only thing people knew at that company was how to develop a cure to that disease, and they generated a boatload of cash from doing it. At a certain point, you could just give it to your shareholders and close up shop, and that's actually a beautiful thing to do. You don't see that happen.
Yeah, imagine the number of jobs today Imagine the number of people whose bread and butter depends on upper castes oppressing lower castes. And lo and behold, therefore, you will always go on seeing that somewhere or the other, you are getting data of upper castes oppressing lower castes. There's an incentive directly in the system for that problem to not go away. Okay, like the example I gave, I think it's a very valid example. If anyone proves me wrong, I'd be happy to be proven wrong here. If I, as someone from the third Varna, fights with my Brahmin vocalist in my band in my rehearsal studio, and we have a fight over a guitar solo, and I end up in the hospital, the headlines in West Bengal will say vocalist beats up guitarist. The same action in Uttar Pradesh or Bihar, the headline will be Brahmin beats up Vaishya.
Enough in the American consciousness and the American culture of when an institution has achieved its purpose, celebrate it and then move on. And I think that culture in our government would result in a vastly restrained scope of government rather than today. It's a one-way ratchet. Once you cause it to come into existence, you cause new things to come into existence, but the old one that came into existence continues to persist and exist as well. And that's where you get this metastasis over the last century.
So what kind of things do you think government should do that the private sector, the forces of capitalism, would create drastic inequalities or create
the favorite question for our Hindutva socialists?
The pain we don't want to have in government.
So if the question is what should government do the private sector cannot, I'll give you one. Protect our border. I mean, capitalism, it's never going to be the job of capitalists or never going to be the capability or inclination of capitalists to preserve a national border. And I think a nation is literally...
Which is why Indian libertarians hate the idea of borders, anarcho-capitalists.
I think one of the chapters of this book, okay, a nation without borders is not a nation. It's almost a tautology. An open border is not a border. Capitalism is not going to solve that. What's going to solve that is a nation. Part of the job of the federal government is to protect the homeland of its nation, in this case, the United States of America. That's an example of a proper function of the federal government, to provide physical security to its citizens. Another proper role of that federal government is to look after, or in this case, it could be state government, to make sure that private parties cannot externalize their costs onto somebody else without their consent. It's a fancy way economists would use to describe it. What does that mean? It means if you go dump your chemicals in somebody else's river, then you're liable for that. It's not that, okay, I'm a capitalist, and so I want to create things, and I'm going to do hell or high water, whether or not that harms people around me. The job of a proper government is to make sure that you protect the rights of those who may be harmed by those who are pursuing their own rights through a system of capitalism. In seeking prosperity, you're free to do it. But if you're hurting somebody else without their consent in the process, the government is there to enforce what is really just a different form of enforcing a private property right. So I would say that those are two central functions of government: is to preserve national boundaries and the national security of a homeland. And number two is to protect and preserve private property rights and the enforcement of those rights.
Yes, protection of life, liberty, and property. Government's job is to give and provide and enforce negative rights, not one positive right after the other. Okay. Now, Rishi, I feel sympathy for you. You sound like a guy who's hearing Vivek Ramaswamy for the first time. I know you aren't, but you still have not made your peace with the fact that we don't have a Vivek Ramaswamy in India, or nor do we have anyone remotely like him in India. I have made my peace with it. I have just admitted to myself that yes, Vivek is just light years ahead. So just curl up in your bed and cry.
Private property rights. And I think at that point, you've described about 80 to 90% of the proper role of government.
What about infrastructure?
Look, I think that most infrastructure can be dealt with through the private sector. I mean, you can get into specifics. You can have infrastructure that's specific to national security. No, I do think that military industrial base is essential to provide national security. That's a form of infrastructure. I don't think you could rely exclusively on the private sector to provide the optimal level of that protection to a nation. But, interstate highways, I think you could think about whether or not that's a common good that everybody benefits from, but nobody has the incentive to create. I think you could make an argument for the existence of interstate highways. I think you could also make powerful arguments for the fact that actually you could have enough private sector co-ops that could cause that to come into existence as well. But, I'm not dogmatic about this, but broadly speaking, 80 to 90% of the goal of the federal government, I'm not going to say 100, 80 to 90% of the goal of the existence of a federal government should be to protect national boundaries and provide security for the people who live there, and to protect the private property rights of the people who reside there.
Yes. Boishali, the difference is that his ideas are not mainstream in USA only because it's being shot in the foot, shot in the knees by a corrupt political class or a corrupt bureaucratic class. Here, even the people don't believe in these ideas. There, the people do believe him. Okay. Look at the response of Vivek. Okay. Vivek can say those exact same things in India today as an Indian. Everyone's going to hate him for it. Everyone's going to oppose him. The common public, I mean.
If we restore that, I think we're well on our way to a revival of what our founding fathers envisioned. And I think many of them would give you the same answer that I just did.
So if we get government out of education, would you be also for reducing this as a government in the states for something like education?
I think here, if it goes closer to municipalities and to states, I'm fine with that being a locus for people determining, as for example, let's just say school districts are taxed at the local level, for that to be a matter for municipalities and townships to actually decide democratically how they actually want that governed, whether it's balance between a public school district versus making that same money available to families in the form of vouchers or other.
That's the difference between a socialist and a not socialist. The validity of his arguments, him getting into this space, us liking him, none of these three things dependent on him getting any shit. Get that in your head.
Other forms of ability to educational savings accounts or whichever mechanism it is to opt out of that. If that's done locally, I'll have views on that tend to go further in the direction of true educational choice and diversity of choice. The implementation of charter schools, the granting of state charters, or even lowering the barriers to granting one. I favor those kinds of policies. But if we've gotten the federal government out of it, that's achieved 75% of what I think we need to achieve, that I'm focused on solving other problems and leave that to the states and municipalities to cover from there.
So given this conversation, what do you think of Elon's proposal of the Department of Government Efficiency in the Trump administration, or really any administration?
Well, I'm of course, biased because Elon and I have discussed that for the better part of the last year and a half. And so I think it's a great idea. It's something that's very consistent with the core premise of my presidential candidacy. I got to know him as I was running for U.S. president in a couple of events that he came to, and then we built a friendship after that. So obviously, I think it's a great idea.
Who do you think is more hardcore on the cutting, you or Elon?
Well, I think Elon's pretty hardcore. I said 75% of the federal bureaucrats, and while I was running for president, he said you need to put at least 75%. So I agree with him. I think I would. I think it'd be a fun competition to see who ends up more hardcore. I think he and I don't think there's someone out there who's going to be more hardcore than here I would be. And the reason is, I think we share in common a willingness to take the risk and see what happens. I mean, the sun will still rise in the east and set in the west. That much I guarantee you. Is there going to be some broken glass and some damage? Yes, there is. There's no way around that. But once you're willing to take that risk, then it doesn't become so scary anymore. And here's the thing, Lex. It's easy to say this. Let's talk about where the rubber hits the road here. Even in the second Trump term, this would be, the discussion. President Trump and I have had this conversation, but I think we would continue to have this conversation. Is where does it rank on our prioritization list? Because there's always going to be a trade-off. If you have a different policy objective that you want to achieve, a good policy objective, whatever that is, right? You could talk about immigration policy. You could talk about economic policy. There are other policy objectives. You're going to trade off a little bit in the short run, the effectiveness of your ability to carry out that policy goal, if you're also committed to actually thinning out the federal government by 75%, because there's just going to be some clunkiness, right? And there's just going to be frictional costs for that level of cut. So the question is, where does that rank on your prioritization list? To pull that off, to pull off a 75% reduction in the size and scale of the federal government, the regulatory state, and the headcount, I think that only happens if that's your top priority. You can do it at a smaller scale, but at that scale, it only happens if that's your top priority, because then as president, you're in a position to say, I know in the super short run, that might even make it a little bit harder for me to do this other thing that I want to do and use the regulatory state to do it. But I'm going to pass on that. I'm going to pass that up. I'm going to bear that hardship and inconvenience because I know this other goal is more important on the scale of decades and centuries for the country. So it's a question of prioritization. And certainly my own view is that now is a moment where that needs to be a top priority for saving this country. And if there's one thing about my campaign, if I was to do it again, I would be even clearer about, actually I talked about a lot of things in the campaign and we can cover a lot of that too. But if there's one thing that I care about more than anything else, is dismantling that bureaucracy. And moreover, it's an assault and a crusade on the nanny state itself. And that nanny state presents itself in several forms. There's the entitlement state, that's the welfare state, presents itself in the form of the regulatory state, that's what we're talking about. And then there's the foreign nanny state, where effectively we are subsidizing other countries that aren't paying their fair share of protection or other resources we provide them. If I was to summarize my ideology in a nutshell, it is to terminate the nanny state in the United States of America in all of its forms. The entitlement state, the regulatory state, and the foreign policy nanny state. Once we've done that, we've revived the republic that I think would make George Washington proud.
So you mentioned Department of Education, but there's also the...
sorry guys, I won't be countering too many people because the focus today is of course Vivek's points here. I'm going to only take a few counter arguments every now and then, okay? I'm sorry. It doesn't mean you won the argument, or it doesn't mean that Vivek is wrong, okay? I'm not taking every counter argument because I'm not going to spend the entire time debating you guys then.
Department of Defense.
Yeah.
And there's a very large number of very powerful people that have gotten used to and a budget that's increasing and the number of wars and military conflicts that's increasing. So if we could just talk about that. So
Sure.
if this is the number one priority, it's like there's difficulty levels here. The DoD it would be probably the hardest. So let's take that on. What's your view on the military-industrial complex, Department of Defense, and wars in general?
So I think the nanny state, I'm against it overall. I'm against the foreign policy nanny state as well. Let me start from that as the starting off point, and then I'll tell you about my views on the DoD and our defense. First of all, I think that, and I think that it was easy for many people from the neocon school of thought to caricature my views with the media at their side. But actually, my own view is, if it's in the interest of the United States of America to provide certain levels of protection to U.S. allies, we can do that as long as those allies actually pay for it. And I think it's important for two reasons. The less important reason, still important reason, the less important reason is it's still money for us, right? It's not like we're swimming in a cash surplus right now. We're at $34 trillion national debt and growing. And I think pretty soon the interest payments are going to be the largest line item in our own federal budget. So it's not like we have money willy-nilly to just hand over for free. That's the less important reason, though. The more important reason is that it makes sure that our allies have actual skin in the game to not have skewed incentives to actually enter conflicts where they're not actually bearing the full cost of those conflicts. So take NATO, for example. Most NATO countries, literally a majority of NATO countries today, do not pay or contribute 2% of their GDP to their own national defense, which is supposedly a requirement to be in NATO. So majority of NATO countries are failing to meet their basic commitment.
Let's get to illegal immigration a bit, because that will be more relevant to India.
The spine of steel to cut through what that short-term advice is you're getting. And I'll tell you, certainly, I intend to do whatever I can for this country, both in the next 4 years and beyond. But my voice on this will be crystal clear. And President Trump knows that's my view on it. And I believe he shares it deeply, is that all else equal, get in there and shut down as much of the excess bureaucracy as we can, do it as quickly as possible. And that's a big part of how we save our country.
Okay, I'll give you an example that's really difficult tension, given your priorities. Immigration. There's an estimated 14 million illegal immigrants in the United States. You've spoken about mass deportation.
Yes.
That requires a lot of effort.
Right.
Money. I mean, like, how do you do it? And how does that conflict with the shutting it down?
Sure. And so it goes back to that original discussion we had, is what are the few proper roles of the federal government? I gave you two. One is of the government, period. One is to protect the national borders and sovereignty of the United States, and two is to protect private property rights. There's a lot else. Most of what the government's doing today, both at the federal and state level, is something other than those two things. But in my book, those are the two things that are the proper function of government. So for everything else the federal government should not be doing, the one thing they should be doing is to protect the homeland of the United States of America.
Yes. Okay. Time to counter some stuff here. So, yes, Hindus are not a voting bloc, but they are a huge money bloc. Okay. And Vivek does not prioritize or even talk about his Indian identity, because it's his main shtick is that the content of your character matters, your actions matter, not the color of your skin. So why would he go around portraying his Indianness, etc.? But more importantly, who was he going to convince or persuade, really? Okay. NRI families have hugely different upbringings among themselves. Some of them have just about been able to convince their kids to not become insane wokes. Most of them haven't. Is Vivek going to convince a 17-year-old NRI girl or boy to not be woke? It's not going to happen in a million years, because they are convinced of, and they have read all those, let's say, Western Dalit feminism literature as well. Okay. The first thing they are going to notice is Tamil Brahminness and ho gaya. So there's no fucking point in Vivek talking to and just being Indian in some way. And the other point is that Abir Zain is very hopeful of Tulsi. I'm not. No. I think at best Vivek might be J.D. Vance's VP candidate in 2028.
America and the sovereignty and sanctity of our national borders. So in that domain, that's mission aligned with a proper purpose for the federal government. I think we're a nation founded on the rule of law. I say this is the kid of legal immigrants. That means your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. And in some ways, if I was to summarize a formula for saving the country over the next 4 years.
Yes, Vivek should have made a vote bank for himself first, because ideas don't matter. Because this is just like a JU college election, okay? Just somehow becoming the politician is the goal here. No, he's above all this.
It would be a tale of two mass deportations. The mass deportations of millions of illegals who are in this country and should not be. And then the mass deportation of millions of unelected federal bureaucrats out of Washington, D.C. Now, all else equal, you could say that those are intention, but I think that the reality is anything outside of the scope of what the core function of the government is, which is protecting borders and protecting private property rights, that's really where I think the predominant cuts need to be. And if you look at the number of people who are looking after the border, it's not even 0.1% of the federal employee base today. So 75% isn't 99.99%, it's 75%, which still leaves that it would still be a tiny fraction of the remaining 25%, which I actually think needs to be more rather than less. So it's a good question, but that's sort of...
So all those Hindu NRIs who are going to go on funding this cricket league, small women's league and stuff, unless they at least show that they are a monetary block under Vivek, there's no point Vivek begging in front of them.
Sort of where I land on when it's a proper role of the federal government, great, act and actually do your job. The irony is 99.9999% of those resources are going to functions other than the protection of private property rights and the protection of our national physical protection.
There is a lot of criticism of the idea of mass deportation, though. So one,
fair enough,
it would cause a large amount of economic harm, at least in the short term. The other is there would be potentially violations of our kind of higher ideals of how we like to treat human beings, in particular, separation of families, for example, tearing families apart. And the other is just like the logistical complexity of doing something like this. How do you answer some of those?
No, tearing families apart has never been against American ideals. If a father is driving drunk and there's a kid in the car with him and the father gets arrested, where do you think is the kid going to be taken? Is the kid going to be told that, okay, drive home, bro, safely, have a safe journey back home? Or what? What kind of, or they are going to be separated for a time being? That's exactly what's going on with illegal immigration as well.
Criticism, I guess.
So fair enough. And I would call those even not even criticisms, but just thoughtful questions, right? Even if somebody who's really aligned with doing this, those are thoughtful questions to ask. So I do want to say something about this point on how we think about the breakage of the rule of law in other contexts. There are 350,000 mothers who are in prison in the United States today who committed crimes and were convicted of them. They didn't take their kids with them to those prisons either, right? So
Ashkacham, he's not going to entirely if Trump keeps on increasing the national debt, and which is why I think he was another, let's say probably the top 3 reasons why he did not join Trump's cabinet or VP candidacy even, okay? Because he was clear from the very beginning. The day J.D. Vance's name was announced or even brought up, he said that, yes, we have some disagreements and stuff, which was his hint that he's not going to just play ball with anyone randomly just because they are on his side. That's called having ideas, ideals, nice things, good things.
So we face difficult trade-offs in all kinds of contexts as it relates to the enforcement of law. And I just want to make that basic observation against the backdrop of, if we're a nation founded on the rule of law, that we acknowledge that there are trade-offs to enforcing the law. And we've acknowledged that in other contexts. I don't think that we should have a special exemption for saying that somehow we weigh the other way when it comes to the issue of the border. We're a nation founded on the rule of law. We enforce laws. That has costs, that has trade-offs, but it's who we are. So that backdrop is, and the easiest fact I can cite is 350,000 or so mothers who are in prison and did not take their kids to prison with them. Is that bad? That it is undesirable for the kids to grow up without those 350,000 mothers? It is. But it's a difficult situation created by people who violated the law and face the consequences of it, which is also a competing and important priority in the country. So that's in the domestic context. As it relates to this question of mass deportations, let's just get very practical, because all that was theoretical. Very practically, there's ways to do this, starting with people who have already broken the law, people who have not just broken the law of entering, but are committing other crimes while already here in the United States. That's a clear case for an instant mass deportation. You have a lot of people who haven't integrated into their communities. You think about the economic impact of this. A lot of people are in detention already. A lot of those people should be immediately returned to their country of origin, or at least what is called a safe third country. So safe third country means even if somebody's claiming to seek asylum from political persecution, we'll move them to another country that doesn't have to be the United States of America that they passed through, say Mexico, before actually coming here. Other countries around the world are doing this. Australia is detaining people. They don't let them out and live a normal, joyful life because they came to the country. They detain them until their case is adjudicated. Well, the rates of fraud in Australia of what people lie about what their conditions are is way lower now than in the United States because people respond to those incentives. So I think that in some ways people make this sound much bigger and scarier than it needs to be. I feel we're taking a deeply pragmatic approach. And the North Star for me is I want the policy that helps the United States citizens who are already here. What's that policy? Clearly, that's going to be a policy that includes a large number of deportations. I think by definition, it's going to be the largest mass deportation in American history. Sounds like a punchline at a campaign rally, but actually it's just a factual statement that says if we've had the by far largest influx of illegal immigrants in American history, it just stands to reason. It's logic that, okay, if we're going to fix that, we're going to have the largest mass deportation in American history. And we can be rational. Start with people who are breaking the law in other ways here in the United States. Start with people who are already in detention or entering detention now. That comes at no cost and strict benefit. There isn't even a little bit of an economic trade-off. Then you get to areas where you would say, okay, the costs actually continue to outweigh the benefits. And that's exactly the way our policy should be guided here. I want to do it in as respectful and as humane of a manner as possible. I mean, the reality is I think one of the things we got to remember, I'll give you the example I gave with the Haitian case in Springfield, town that I spent a lot of time in growing up in Ohio. I live about an hour from there today. I don't blame the individual Haitians who came here. I'm not saying that they're bad people, because in that particular case, those weren't even people who broke the law in coming here. They came as part of a program called temporary protective status. Now, the operative word there is the first one, temporary. They have been all kinds of lawsuits. There have been all kinds of lawsuits for people who even 8, 10, 12, 14 years after the earthquake in Haiti, where many of them came, when they're going to be removed, there are allegations of racial discrimination or otherwise. No, temporary protective status means it's temporary. And we're not abandoning the rule of law when we send them back. We're abandoning the rule of law when we let them stay. Now, if that has a true benefit to the United States of America, economically or otherwise, go through the paths that allow somebody to enter this country for economic reasons, but don't do it through asylum-based claims or temporary protected status. And I think one of the features of our immigration system right now is it is built on a lie, and it incentivizes lying. The reason is the arguments for keeping people in the country, if those are economic reasons, but the people actually entered using claims of asylum or refugee status, those two things don't match up. So just be honest about what our immigration system actually is. I think we do need dramatic reforms to the legal immigration system to select purposely for the people who are going to actually improve the United States of America. I think there are many people, I know some of them, right? I gave a story of one guy who I met who is educated at our best universities, or among our best universities. He went to Princeton, he went to Harvard Business School. He has a great job in the investment community. He was a professional tennis player. He was a concert pianist. He could do a Rubik's Cube in less than a minute. I'm not making this stuff up. These are hard facts. He can't get a green card in the United States. He's been here for 10 years or something like this. He asked me for...
Shashwatashil, it's called push coming to shove after going down to 240. Do you think he was going to have that same protection if BJP crossed 400? Why wasn't he invited to Prime Minister's opening ceremony, inauguration ceremony?
For the best advice I could give him, I unfortunately could not give him the actual best advice, which would be to just take a flight to Mexico and cross the border and claim to be somebody who is seeking asylum in the United States. That would have been morally wrong advice, so I didn't give it to him. But practically, if you were giving him advice, that would be the best advice that you actually could give somebody, which is a broken system on both sides. People who are going to make those contributions to the United States and pledge allegiance to the United States and speak our language and assimilate, we should have a path for them to be able to add value to the United States. Yet they're not the ones who are getting in. It's actually the people, our immigration system selects for people who are willing to lie. That's what it does. Selects for people who are willing to say they're seeking refugee status or seeking asylum when in fact they're not. And then we have policymakers who lie after the fact using economic justifications to keep them here.
Yeah.
But if it was an economic justification, that should have been the criteria you used to bring them in the first place.
Yes.
Not this illusion of asylum or refugee status. There was a case, actually, even the New York Times reported on this, believe it or not, of a woman who came from Russia fleeing Vladimir Putin's intolerant anti-LGBTQ regime. She was fleeing persecution by the evil man Putin. She came here, and eventually, when she was pressed on the series of lies, it came out that, and she was crying finally when she broke down and admitted this. She was like, I'm not even gay. I don't even like gay people. That's what she said. And yet she was pretending to be some sort of LGBTQ advocate who was persecuted in Russia, when in fact it was just somebody who was seeking better economic conditions in the United States.
Right.
I'm not saying you're wrong to seek better economic conditions in the United States, but you are wrong to lie about it.
Yes. And you are being incentivized to lie all the time by the foreign policy of USA. For example, that basketball player who got rescued from Russia, who hates everything basically USA stands for. She's a far left, or he, I don't remember. I think it was a transgender basketball player or something. So that guy / girl is a far left commie. At the same time, when he or she was being rescued from Russia, there was an American spy sitting in Russian prisons, and everyone else celebrated that basketball players coming back to USA.
And that's what you're seeing. A lot of people, even in this industry of sort of quote unquote tourism to the United States, they're having their kids in the United States. They go back to their home country, but their kids enjoy birthright citizenship. That's built on a lie. You have people claiming to suffer from persecution. In fact, they're just working in the United States and then living in these relative mansions in parts of Mexico or Central America after they've spent 4 or 5 years making money here. Just abandon the lie. Let's just have an immigration system built on honesty. Just tell the truth. If the argument is that we need more people here for economically fulfilling jobs, I'm skeptical the extent to which a lot of those arguments actually end up being true. But let's have that debate in the open rather than having it through the back door saying that it's refugee and asylum status when we know it's a lie. And then we justify it after the fact by saying that that economically helps the United States. Cut the dishonesty. And I just think that that is a policy we would do well to expand every sphere. We talk about from the military industrial complex to the rise of the managerial class to a lot of what our government's covered up about our own history to even this question of immigration today. Just tell the people the truth. And I think our government would be better serving our people if it did.
Yeah, I remember libertarians hate the idea of border security. Libertarians absolutely love illegal immigration. So as a libertarian leading person, Vivek saying these things is very important, and hence the idea of national libertarianism, for which you must check out his speech at NatCon, National Conservatism Summit.
In the way you describe eloquently the immigration system is broken in that way, that is built fundamentally on lies. But there's the other side of it. Illegal immigrants are used in political campaigns for fear mongering, for example. So
they are used by the opposite side as well to say that, you see, these innocent people, they are going to be harmed if you vote for that political party in power, or vote that political party to power.
I would like to understand is, what is the actual harm that illegal immigrants are causing? So the claim, one of the more intense claims is of crime. And I haven't studied this rigorously, but sort of the surface level studies all show that legal and illegal immigrants commit less crime than
I think that is true for legal immigrants. I think it's not true for illegal immigrants.
That's not what I saw.
So I, in sort of in this part of why I wrote this book, okay, and the book is called Truths, so I better darn well have well-sourced facts in here, right? Can't be made up hypotheses, hard truths. And there's a chapter where, even in my own research on it, Lex, I mean, I know a lot about this issue from my time as a presidential candidate, but even in writing the chapter on the border here, I learned a lot from a lot of different dimensions, and some of which even caused me to revise some of my premises going into it, okay? My main thesis in that chapter is, forget the demonization of illegal or legal immigrants or whatever, as you put it, right? Fear-mongering, just put all that to one side. I want an immigration system that is built on honesty.
That's not going to happen at the hands of the bureaucracy. Hey, come on. Admit you don't listen to any other podcast except Satyology.
Identify what the objective is. We could debate the objectives. We might have different opinions on the objectives. Some people may say the objective is the economic growth of the United States. I air that argument in this book. And I think that that's insufficient, personally. Personally, I think the United States is more than just an economic zone. It is a country. It is a nation bound together by civic ideals. I think we need to screen not just for immigrants who are going to make economic contributions, but those who speak our language, those who are able to assimilate, and those who share those civic ideals and know the U.S. history even better than the average U.S. citizen who's here. That's what I believe. But even if you disagree with me and say, no, the sole goal is economic production in the United States, then at least have an immigration system that's honest about that, rather than one which claims to solve for that goal by bringing in people who are rewarded for being a refugee. We should reward the people in that model, which is, I don't even think should be the whole model. But even if that were your model, reward the people who have demonstrably proven that they would make economic contributions to the United States, not the people who have demonstrated that they're willing to lie to achieve a goal. And right now, our immigration system, if it rewards one quality over any other, if there's one parameter that it rewards over any other, it isn't civic allegiance to the United States, it isn't fluency in English, it isn't the ability to make an economic contribution to this country. The number one attribute, human attribute, that our immigration system rewards is whether or not you are willing to lie. And the people who are telling those lies about whether they're seeking asylum or not are the ones who are most likely to get in. And the people who are most unwilling to tell those lies are the ones who are actually not getting in. That is a hard, uncomfortable truth about our immigration system. And the reason is because the law says you only get asylum if you're going to face bodily harm or near-term risk of bodily injury based on your religion, your ethnicity, or certain other factors. And so when you come into the country, you're asked, do you fulfill that criteria or not? And the number one way to get into this country is to check the box and say yes. So that means just systematically, right? Imagine if you're a university, Harvard or Yale or whatever, you're running your admissions process. The number one attribute you're selecting for isn't your SAT score, it isn't your GPA, it isn't your athletic accomplishments. It's whether or not you're willing to lie on the application. You're going to have a class populated by a bunch of charlatans and frauds. That's exactly what our immigration system is doing to the United States of America, is literally selecting for the people who are willing to lie. Let's say you have somebody who's a person of integrity says, okay, I want a better life for my family, but I want to teach my kids that I'm not going to lie or break the law to do it. That person is infinitely less likely to get into the United States. I know it sounds provocative to frame it that way, but it is not an opinion. It is a fact that is the number one human attribute that our current immigration system is selecting for. I want an immigration system centered on honesty. In order to implement that, we require acknowledging what the goals of our immigration system are in the first place. And there we have competing visions on the right. Okay, amongst conservatives, there's a rift. Some conservatives believe, I respect them for their honesty, I disagree with them, believe that the goal of the immigration system should be to, in part, protect American workers from the effects of foreign wage competition. That if we have immigrants, it's going to bring down prices, and we need to protect American workers from the effects of that downward pressure on wages. It's a goal. It's a coherent goal. I don't think it's the right goal, but many of my friends on the right believe that's the goal. But at least it's honest, and then we can design an honest immigration system to achieve that goal if that's their goal. I have other friends on the right that say the sole goal is economic growth. Nothing else matters. I disagree with that as well. My view is the goal should be whatever enriches the civic quality of the United States of America. That includes those who know the language, know our ideals, pledge allegiance to those ideals, and also are willing to make economic contributions to the country, which is one of our ideals as well. But whatever it is,
this criteria alone should have disqualified the thousands of Bengali or South Indian commies that USA has let infiltrate their systems. How did they not check for this?
We can have that debate. I have a very different view. I don't think it's a proper role of immigration policy to make it a form of labor policy, because the United States of America is founded on excellence. We should be able to compete. But that's a policy debate we can have. But right now, we're not even able to have the policy debate because the whole immigration policy is built on not only a lie, but on rewarding those who do lie. And that's what I want to see change.
There, just to linger a little bit on the demonization and to bring Ann Coulter into the picture. Her,
Nice.
which I recommend people should listen to your conversation with her. I haven't listened to her much, but she had this thing where she clearly admires and respects you as a human being. And she's basically saying you're one of the good ones. And this idea that you had this brilliant question of like, what does it mean to be an American?
Mm-hmm.
And she basically said, not you, Vivek.
Yes, Ash Ketchum. What Vivek is proposing here, that has never been the goal or ideal.
She said, well, maybe you, but not people like you. So that whole kind of approach to immigration, I think, is really anti-meritocratic.
And maybe even anti-American.
Anti-American, yeah.
So I want to confront this directly because it is a popular current on the American right. The reason I'm not picking on Ann Coulter specifically is I think actually it's a much more widely shared view, and I just give her at least credit for willing to articulate it, a view that the blood and soil is what makes for your American identity, your genetic lineage. And I just reject that view. I think it's anti-American. I think what makes for an American identity is your allegiance, your unabiding allegiance to the founding ideals of this country, and your willingness to pledge allegiance to those ideals. So those are two different views. I think that there is a view on the American right now that says that we're not a creedal nation, that our nation's not about a creed. It's about a physical place and a physical homeland. I think that view fails on several accounts. Obviously, we're a nation. Every nation has to have a geographic space that it defines its own. So obviously, we are, among other things, a geographic space. But the essence of the United States of America, I think, is the common creed, the ideals that hold that common nation together. Without that, a few things happen. First of all, American exceptionalism becomes impossible, and I'll tell you why. Every other nation is also built on the same idea. Most nations have been built on common blood and soil arguments, genetic stock of, Italy or Japan would have a stronger national identity than the United States in that case, because they have a much longer standing claim on what their genetic lineage really was. The ethnicity of the people is far more pure in those contexts than in the United States. So that's the first reason. American exceptionalism becomes impossible. The second is there's all kinds of contradictions that then start to emerge. If your claim on American identity is defined based on how long you've been here, well, then the Native Americans would have a far greater claim of being American than somebody who came here.
Yeah, Michael Knowles, who was Vivek's junior in Harvard, has tremendous respect for him. I don't think he would agree with this point.
On the Mayflower, or somebody who came here afterwards. Now, maybe that blood and soil view is, no, it's not quite Native Americans. You only have to start at this point and end at this point. So on this view of blood and soil identity, it has to be, okay, you couldn't have come before a certain year, then it doesn't count. But if you came after a certain year, it doesn't count either. That just becomes highly uncompelling as a view of what American national identity actually is, versus my view that American national identity is grounded on whether or not you pledge allegiance to the ideals codified in the Declaration of Independence and actualized in the U.S. Constitution. And, it's been said, some of my friends on the right have said things like, people will not die for a set of ideals. People won't fight for abstractions or abstract ideals. I actually disagree with that. The American Revolution basically disproves that. The American Revolution was fought for anything over abstract ideals that said that, we believe in self-governance and free speech and free
No, taxation without representation had something to do with it, of course. And taxation is not an abstract ideal.
exercise of religion. That's what we believe in the United States, which was different from old world England. So I do think that there is this brewing debate on the right. And do I disagree like hell with Ann Coulter on this? Absolutely. And did I take serious issue with some of the things she told me? Absolutely. But I also believe that she had the stones to say, if I may say it that way, that things that many on the right believe, but haven't quite articulated in the way that she has. And I think we need to have that debate in the open. Now, personally, I think most of the conservative movement actually is with me on this, but I think it's become a very popular counter narrative in the other direction to say that, your vision of American identity is far more physical in nature. And to me, I think it is still ideals based in nature. And I think that that's a good debate for the future for us to have in the conservative movement. And I think it's going to be a defining feature of, what direction the conservative movement goes in the future.
Quick pause. Bathroom break?
Yeah.
Let me ask you to, again, steel me on the case for and against Trump. So my biggest criticism for him is the fake elector scheme, the 2020 election, and actually the 2020 election.
We have 45 minutes to go, so let's skip the Donald Trump part as well. Let's check out war in Ukraine. How long to go? 157. Yeah.
A focus on both the policies, but also who's going to be more likely to revive the country. That I think is a healthy debate headed to an election. I think everybody has their personality attributes, their flaws. What makes them funny and lovable to some people makes them irritating to others. I think that matters less heading into an election.
I love that you do that. I love that you focus on policy and can speak for hours on policy. Let's look at foreign policy.
Sure.
What kind of peace deal do you think is possible, feasible, optimal in Ukraine? If you sat down, you became president, if you sat down with Zelensky and sat down with Putin, what do you think is possible to talk to them about? One of the hilarious things you did, which were intense and entertaining, your debates in the primary. But anyway, is how you grilled the other candidates that didn't know any regions. They wanted to send money and troops and lead to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, and they didn't know any of the regions in Ukraine.
Yeah.
You had a lot of zingers in that one. But anyway, how do you think about negotiating with world leaders about what's going on there?
Yeah, so look, I think that let's just get the self-interest of each party on the table and to be very transparent about it. From everyone's perspective, they think the other side is the aggressor or whatever. Just get it on the table. Russia is concerned about NATO shifting the balance of power away from Russia to Western Europe when NATO has expanded far more than they expected to. And frankly, that Russia was told that NATO was going to expand. It's an uncomfortable fact for some in America, but James Baker made a commitment to Mikhail Gorbachev in the early 90s, where he said NATO would expand not 1 inch past East Germany. Well, NATO's expanded far more after the fall of the USSR than it did during the existence of the USSR. And that is a reality we have to contend with. That's the Russian perspective. From the Western perspective, the hard fact is Russia was the aggressor in this conflict, crossing the boundaries of a sovereign nation. And that is a violation of international norms, and it's a violation of the recognition of international law. Nations without borders are not a nation. And so against that backdrop, what's the actual interest of each country here? I think if we're able to do a reasonable deal that gives Russia the assurances it needs about what they might allege as NATO expansionism violating prior commitments, but get codified commitments for Russia that we're not going to see willy-nilly behavior of just randomly deciding they're going to violate the sovereignty of neighboring nations and have hard assurances and consequences for that. That's the beginnings of a deal. But then I want to be ambitious for the United States. I want to weaken the Russia-China alliance. And I think that we can do a deal that gives some real gives to Russia, conditioned on Russia withdrawing itself from its military alliance with China. And this could be good for Russia, too, in the long run, because right now, Vladimir Putin does not enjoy being Xi Jinping's little brother in that relationship. But Russia's military, combined with China's naval capacity and Russia's hypersonic missiles and China's economic might, together, those countries in an alliance pose a real threat to the United States. But if
Yes, and a little something called India.
as a condition for a reasonable discussion about where different territories land, given what's occupied right now, hard requirements that Russia remove its military presence from the Western Hemisphere. People forget this. Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, we don't want a Russian military presence in the Western Hemisphere. That too would be a win for the United States. No more joint military exercises with China off the coast of the Aleutian Islands. The kinds of wins that the United States wants to protect the West's security, get Russia out of the Western Hemisphere, certainly out of the North American periphery, and then also make sure that Russia's no longer in that military alliance with China. In return for that, able to provide Russia some things that are important to Russia, we'd have to have a reasonable discussion about what the territorial concessions would be at the end of this war to bring it to peace and resolution, and what the guarantees are to make sure that NATO is going to not expand beyond the scope of what the United States has at least historically guaranteed. That, I think, together would be a reasonable deal that gives every party what they're looking for, that results in immediate peace, that results in greater stability, and most importantly, weakening the Russia-China alliance, which I think is the actual threat that we have so far, no matter who in this debate of more or less Ukraine funding has really failed to confront. That, I think, is the way we de-escalate the risk of World War III and weaken the threats to the West by actually dismantling that alliance.
So from the American perspective, the main interest is weakening the alliance between Russia and China.
Yes. I think the military alliance between Russia and China represents the single greatest threat we face. Yeah. So do a deal that's very reasonable across the board. But one of the main things we get out of it is weakening that alliance. So no joint military exercises, no military collaborations. These are monitorable. These are monitorable attributes. If there's cheating on that, we're going to immediately have consequences as a consequence of their cheating. But we can't cheat on our own obligations that we would make in the context of that deal as well.
There might be some extremely painful things for Ukraine here. So Ukraine currently captured a small region in Russia, the Kursk region, but Russia has captured giant chunks, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson regions. So it seems, given what you're laying out, it's very unlikely for Russia to give up any of the regions it's already captured.
I actually think that that would come down to the specifics of the negotiation. But the core goals of the negotiation are peace in this war, weaken the Russia-China alliance. And for Russia, what do they get out of it? Part of this is, here's something that's not negative for Ukraine that could be positive for Russia as part of that deal, right? Because it's not a zero-sum game.
Yeah, Ashkecham, but that India being relevant to America to oppose China, that's not nothing. That's insanely significant. That little bit of a key support that India might end up giving to China or Russia, if push came to shove, that's not nothing. that could tip the scales in against USA's favor or against USA. And remember this conversation that Ben Shapiro and Vivek had. Okay, I think even before Vivek was running for president, there Vivek and Ben both agreed that USA can't do any fucking thing in preventing Taiwan from getting annexed, etc., invaded, unless India helps, unless Indian Navy goes there to fight China or something. Okay, so they depend on India on not too many numbers of things, maybe one or two things, but that one or two things is very significant.
Alone with Ukraine on the losing end of this, I think reopening economic relations with the West would be a big win for Russia, but also a carrot that gets them out of that military relationship with China. So I do think that the foreign policy establishment has historically been, at the very least, unimaginative about the levers that we're able to use. Actually, I was a little bit critical of Nixon earlier in this discussion for his contribution to the overgrowth of the U.S. entitlement state and regulatory state. But I'll give Nixon credit here on a different point, which is that he was imaginative of being able to pull Red China out from the clasp of the USSR. Yeah. He broke the China-Russia alliance back then, which was an important step to bring us to the near end of the Cold War. So I think there's an opportunity for a similar unconventional maneuver now of using greater reopened economic relations with Russia to pull Russia out from the hands of China today. There's no skin off Ukraine's back for that.
I agree, Rishabh. And unless Trump sweetens the deal to something insanely significant levels, which I don't think is going to happen.
And I do think that's a big carrot for Russia in this direction. I do think that will involve some level of territorial negotiation as well, that, out of any good deal, not everyone's going to like 100% of what comes out of it. But that's part of the cost of securing peace, is that not everyone's going to be happy about every attribute.
Yeah.
But I could make a case that an immediate peace deal is also now in the best interests of Ukraine. Let's just rewind the clock. We're looking at now, let's just say we're early 2022, maybe June of 2022. Zelensky was ready to come to the table.
I wish they had discussed China a little more specifically. What the fuck cares about? Okay, here they discuss China. Yeah, let's get to China, man.
Well, not just with one side of this, not just with Zelensky or with Putin, but across the board, hardball for our own interests, which are the interests of stability here. And I think that will happen to well serve both Ukraine and Russia in the process.
If you were president, would you call Putin?
Absolutely. I mean, in any negotiation, you got to manage when you're calling somebody and when you're not. But I do believe that open conversation and the willingness to have that as another lever in the negotiation is totally fair game.
Okay, let's go to the China side of this. The big concern here is that the brewing cold, or God forbid, hot war between the United States and China in the 21st century. How do we avoid that?
So a few things. One is, I do think the best way we also avoid it is by reducing the consequences to the United States in the event of that type of conflict. Because at that point, what you're setting up for, if the consequences are existential for the United States, then what you're buying yourself in the context of what could be a small conflict is an all-out great war. So the first thing I want to make sure we avoid is a major conflict between the United States and China, like a World War level conflict. And the way to do that is to bring down the existential stakes for the US. And the way we bring down the existential stakes for the US is make sure that the United States does not depend on China for our modern way of life. Right now we do. Okay, so right now we depend on China for everything from the pharmaceuticals in our medicine cabinet. 95% of ibuprofen, one of the most basic medicines used in the United States, depends on China for its supply chain. We depend on China, ironically, for our own military industrial base.
Yeah.
Think about how little sense that makes, actually. Our own military, which supposedly exists to protect ourselves against adversaries, depends for its own supplies, semiconductors and otherwise, on our top adversary. That doesn't make sense. Even if you're a libertarian in the school of Friedrich von Hayek, somebody I admire as well, even then you would not argue for a foreign dependence on adversary.
Yes, Ash. And Trump's, of course, a bit of his rhetoric, his speech pattern, his choice of words is threatening anyway, sort of I'm the local gunda or stud sort of a thing. But even then, India, of course, did not materialize those deals for lack of tech sharing or even data violation issues, or just because of our labor neta mafia class. But even then, there's, I don't think, any significant sweetening of the deal that's going to happen in favor of India.
For your military.
As we have discussed and concluded repeatedly, that the biggest or possibly the only benefit, and even if it is one benefit, it's a very significant benefit of Trump coming to power for India, is possibly the death of wokeism, or the beginning of the death of wokeism. It's now terminally ill.
So I think that's the next step we need to take, is at least reduce U.S. dependence on China for the most essential inputs for the functioning of the United States of America, including our own military. As a side note, I believe that means not just onshoring to the United States. It does. But if we're...
Boishalidi, which tells you that the minimum wage law is not going to go away. If it does, it will be a fucking miracle, and I'll be instantly surprised. And more importantly, even illegal immigrants are not going to be kicked out. There will be a token number of illegal immigrants because there are so many in the last few months itself. They will probably kick out 30,000, 40,000, maybe 1 lakh illegal immigrants just to show off. They're not going to kick out all of them.
We're really serious about that. It also means expanding our relationships with allies like Japan, South Korea, India, the Philippines. And that's an interesting debate to have, because some on the right would say, okay, I want to decouple from China, but I also want less trade with all these other places.
Pranav, actually, the cancelling of the FCRA licenses have hit them really hard. And I think the government has played other shenanigans elsewhere, fixed some nuts and bolts issues here and there as well. Because I have a friend who works in sort of an NGO, I think. Yeah. So they have someone who is very, very, passionate about poor people of India, etc. And that guy, her boss, is from a foreign nation. So I asked her bluntly, even though she's a commie herself, that, okay, so must be big time into conversion, right? Because only Jesus can save poor people. He said, no. That guy got fired. The one we have now doesn't care about conversions and stuff. So why, out of the blue, why would that guy get fired and have a different guy who's not bothered about conversions get hired?
You can't have both those things at the same time. You can have one or the other. You can't have both. And so we have to acknowledge and be honest with ourselves that there are trade-offs to declaring independence from China. But the question is, what are the long-run benefits? Now, you think about the other way to do this is strategic clarity. I think the way that you see world wars often emerge is strategic ambiguity from two adversaries who don't really know what the other side's red line is or isn't, and accidentally crosses those red lines. And so I think we need to be much clearer with what are our hard red lines and what aren't they. And I think that's the single most effective way to make sure this doesn't spiral into major world war. And then let's talk about ending the...
Baba Bistril, let's say on the level of rhetoric and stuff, this does not mean I agree with completely JSD or Kushal, okay? You all know my viewpoints. I'm somewhere in the middle. And I do see great arguments from both people's sides. But at least on this factor, if there is absolutely no, where did his previous comment go? Yeah. If there's absolutely no relative morality, let's say even just on the plane of rhetorics and stuff, how else are we going to have CA? Okay. Why are we going to allow some Bangladeshis and not other Bangladeshis? Do you have some sort of personal guarantee from non-Muslim Bangladeshis that they are not going to be criminals? How? Why? Or then, because of that constant morality, do you oppose CA then?
The Russia-Ukraine conflict in the terms that I just discussed with you before, I think weakening the Russia-China alliance not only reduces the risk that Russia becomes an aggressor, it also reduces the risk that China takes the risks that could escalate us to World War III as well. So I think that geopolitically, you got to look at these things holistically. That end of the Russia-Ukraine war and that peace deal de-escalates not only the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but the risk of a broader conflict that includes China as well, by also weakening China, because Russia also has hypersonic missiles and missile capabilities that are ahead of that of China's. If Russia's no longer in a military alliance with China, that changes China's calculus as well. So that's kind of, I think, more strategic vision we need in our foreign policy than we've had since certainly, the Nixon era. I think that you need people who are going to be able to challenge the status quo, question the existing orthodoxies, the willingness to use levers to get great deals done that otherwise wouldn't have gotten done. And that's why I do think someone like Donald Trump in the presidency, and obviously I ran for president as an outsider and a businessman as well. I think this is an area, our foreign policy is one where we actually benefit from having business leaders in those roles rather than people who are shackled by the traditional political manner of thinking.
I think the thing you didn't quite make clear, but I think implied, is that we have to accept the red line that China provides of the one China policy.
Both sides need to have their red lines. So, we can get into specifics, but it's gonna vary depending on the circumstances. But the principle that I would give you is that we have to have a hard red line that's clear. I think that hard red line, I was clear during my campaign on this, so I'll say it again, is I think that we have to have a clear red line that China will not...
For the ones who are not debating decoloniality and are actually listening to the discussion here, do you all believe that anyone other than Vivek is going to give a hard red line? Are they going to make explicit where their red line is in terms of a pro-USA POV, okay? I don't think anyone has a clear red line. It's all about, let's just grab as much as we can, okay? I'm not sure even if does China have a real red line?
Should not, for any time in the foreseeable future, annex Taiwan. I do think that for the United States, it probably is...
Ash, yes, of course. He appreciates Nixon only for the foreign policy thing, not for getting out of the gold standard. Because you remember, he is pro-de-dollarization.
is prudent right now not to suddenly upend the diplomatic policy we've adopted for decades of what is recognizing the one China policy and our position of quiet deference to that, and understand that may be their red line, is the national recognition of Taiwan as an independent nation would be a red line that China would have, but we would have a red line to say that we do not in any circumstance tolerate the annexation by physical force in any time in the foreseeable future when that's against the interests of the United States of America. So there's examples, but the principle here is, you asked, how do we avoid major conflict with China? I think it starts with clear red lines on both sides. I think it starts with also lowering the stakes for the
India doesn't know the clear red lines up until I think like the last few months, or like last 1 month. We didn't know where the red line was with China.
United States by making sure we're not dependent on China for our modern way of life. And I think it also starts with, ironically, using a peaceful resolution to the Ukraine war as a way of weakening the Russia-China alliance, which in the other direction of weakening China has significant benefits to us as well.
But what do you do when China says very politely, we're going to annex Taiwan, whether you like it or not?
Against the backdrop that I just laid out,
They will.
that's not going to happen. That wouldn't happen if we actually make sure that we're crystal clear about what our red lines and priorities are. We're also dependent on Taiwan.
Who's going to fight for you near China in the Southeast Asia area?
Right now for our own semiconductor supply chain. So China knows
You don't have navy there. Your parts of your weapons are created in China.
that's going to draw us into serious conflict in that circumstance. So against the backdrop of clearly drawn red lines, against the backdrop of Russia no longer automatically being in China's camp, that's a big lever. I think also strengthening our relationship with other allies where we have room to strengthen those relationships, like India. And I'm not just saying that, because my name is Vivek Ramaswamy, right? I'm saying it because it's strategically important to the United States to understand that, God forbid, in a conflict scenario, China would perceive some risk to the Indian Ocean or the Andaman Sea, no longer being reliable for getting Middle Eastern oil.
Which means insane sweetening of the deal with Narendra Modi. And how are they fucking possibly going to do it? Other than maybe give out some nice dialogues on Hindus in Bangladesh.
Supplies. There's a lot of levers here, but I think that if we are both strategically clear with our allies and with our adversaries about what our red lines are, what our priorities are, reasonable deals that pull Russia out of the hands of China and vice versa, reasonable allies and relationships that cause China to question whether it can continue to have the same access to Middle Eastern oil supplies as it does today, and then clear red lines with China itself about what we definitely aren't okay with, and understand that they may have certain red lines too. That allows us, I think, to still avoid what many people will call the unavoidable conflict, the Thucydides trap, against the circumstance of when there's a rising power against the backdrop of a declining power, conflict always becomes inevitable. That's a theory. It's not a law of physics. And I don't think that, A, we have to be a declining power, and B, I don't think that has to necessarily result in major conflict with China here. It's going to require real leadership with this. And
that real leadership is going to have to sweeten deals for India to a significant extent, okay?
Spine.
Which is not going to happen.
You don't have to judge based on international relations theory to form your view on this. 4 years under Trump, we didn't have major conflicts in the Middle East, in places like Russia, Ukraine. We were on the cusp of war with North Korea when Obama left office and Trump took over. 4 years under Biden, less than 4 years under Biden and Harris, what do you have? Major conflicts in the Middle East, major conflict in Russia, Ukraine, judged by the results. And, I would say that even if you're somebody who disagrees with a lot of Donald Trump and you don't like his style, if your single issue is you want to stay out of World War III, I think there's a pretty clear case for why you go for Trump in this election.
So Prime Minister Modi, I think you've complimented him in a bunch of different directions, one of which is when you're discussing nationalism.
Yeah, I believe that, somebody I've gotten to know actually reasonably well, for example, recently is Giorgia Meloni, who's a leader of Italy. Told me the same thing. One of the things I love about her as a leader of Italy.
Lex Fridman brings up Modi and he goes to Meloni. What is happening here?
Is that she does not apologize for the national identity.
Which is when you
at a World War III, I think there's a pretty clear case for why you go for Trump in this election.
Okay, so Lex Fridman didn't
Prime
mention
Minister
Modi by
Modi,
name.
I think you've complimented him in a bunch of different directions, one of which is when you're discussing nationalism.
Yeah, I think I believe that, somebody I've gotten to know actually reasonably well, for example, recently is Giorgia Meloni, who's a leader of Italy. Told her the same thing. One of the things I love about her as a leader of Italy is that she does not apologize for the national identity of the country, and that she stands for certain values uncompromisingly, and she doesn't give a second care about what the media.
Ash Ketchum, a lot of right-wingers have been pissed off with Lex for the last few months already. Lex already quotes a lot of leftist sources. So he quotes American leftist sources already to a large extent. So India, obviously.
Media has to say about it. One of the things I loved last time I spoke to her when she was in the US, when we sat down, was she talked about she doesn't even read the newspaper. She doesn't read and watch the media, and it allows her to make decisions that are best for the people. And there are elements of that in Modi's approach as well, which I respect about him, is he doesn't apologize for the fact that India has a national identity and that the nation should be proud of it. But I'm not saying that because I'm proud of Maloney or Modi for their own countries. I'm American. I think there are lessons to learn from leaders who are proud of their own nation's identity rather than apologizing for it. And I think it's a big part of, it's why I ran for president on a campaign centered on national pride. It's also why I'm not only voting for, but actively supporting Donald Trump, because I do think he is going to be the one that restores that missing national pride in the United States. And, I touch on this as well in the book. There's a chapter here. It says nationalism isn't a bad word. I think nationalism can be a very positive thing if it's grounded in the actual true attributes of a nation. And in the United States, that doesn't mean ethno-nationalism, because that was not what the national identity of the United States was based on in the first place. But a civic nationalism grounded in our actual national ideals, that is who we are. And I think that is something that we've gotten uncomfortable with.
AA, do you honestly believe Kushal Mehra can't debate Dhruv Rathi or Akash Banerjee? Do you believe that really? Or do you just hate Kushal Mehra and therefore you are saying it? Just tell us the truth here. That would tell a lot, say a lot.
Countries to say that, I'm proud of being American. I believe in American exceptionalism. Somehow that's looking down on others. No, I'm not looking down on anybody, but I'm proud of my own country.
Yeah.
And I think Modi's revived that spirit in India in a way that was missing for a long time. Right? India had an inferiority complex, a psychological inferiority.
Oh, are we going to discuss decoloniality with Vivek Ramaswamy now? Yes, we had an inferiority complex and Vivek knows about it. He also knows about casteism in India and he knows how it decreased in India because he came every year when he was a kid up until he was like young adult or adolescent with his father who had to leave because India was socialist. Holy shit, what's happening?
I think that is something that we've gotten uncomfortable with in the countries to say that, I'm proud of being American. I believe in American exceptionalism. Somehow that's looking down on others. No, I'm not looking down on anybody, but I'm proud of my own country. And I think Modi's revived that spirit in India in a way that was missing for a long time, right? India had an inferiority complex, a psychological inferiority complex, but now to be proud of its national heritage and its national myth making and its national legacy and history. And to say that, every nation does have to have a kind of myth making about its past and to be proud of that. It's like Malcolm X actually said this here in the United States. He said, a nation without an appreciation for its history is like a tree without roots. It's dead. And I think that that's true, not just for the United States. I think it's true for every other nation. I think leaders like Maloney in Italy, leaders like Modi in India have done a great job that I wish to bring that type of pride back in the United States. And
yeah, the right wing can unite to a certain extent all over the world, of course, at least in countering wokeism. When we don't have wokeism, we are going to be having battles over semiconductors anyway.
Whatever I do next, Lex, I'll tell you this is, I think reviving that sense of identity and pride, especially in the next generation, is one of the most important things we can do for this country.
Speaking of what you do next, any chance you run in 2028?
Well, I'm not going to rule it out. I mean, that's a long time from now. And I'm most focused on what I can do in the next chapter for the country. I ran for president, a million things that I learned from that experience that you can only learn by doing it. It was very much a fire first, aim later. When getting into the race, there was no way I could have planned and plotted this out as somebody who was coming from the outside. I was 37 years old, came from the business world. So there was a lot that only could learn by actually doing it, and I did. But I care about the same things that led me into the presidential race, and I don't think the issues have been solved. I think that we have a generation that is lost in the country. It's not just young people. I think it's all of us in some ways are hungry for purpose and meaning at a time in our history when the things that used to fill that void in our heart, they're missing. And I think we need a president who both has the right policies for the country, seal the border, grow the economy, stay out of World War III, end rampant crime. Yes, we need the right policies. But we also need leaders who, in a sustained way, revive our national character, revive our sense of pride in this country, revive our identity as Americans. And, I think that need exists as much today as it did when I first ran for president. I don't think it's going to be automatically solved in just a few years. I think Donald Trump is the right person to carry that banner forward for the next 4 years. But after that, we'll see where the country is headed into 2028. And whatever I do, it'll be whatever has a maximal positive impact on the country. I'll also tell you that my laser focus, maybe as distinct from other politicians on both sides, is to take America to the next level, to move beyond our victimhood culture, to restore our culture of excellence. We got to shut down that nanny state, the entitlement state, the regulatory state, the foreign policy nanny state, shut it down and revive who we really are as Americans. And I'm as passionate about that as ever. But the next step is not running for president. The next step is what happens in the next 4 years. And that's why over the next 4 weeks, I'm focused on doing whatever I can to make sure we succeed in this election.
Well, I hope you...
Well, Abhirzan, wokeism is basically equal to terrorism because wokes defend terrorism all the time. So now, Vivek spent about $1 billion running just once. What's the point of even running it once again? Maybe one more time he can go for it, but 2028.
Run because this was made clear on the stage in the primary debates. You have a unique clarity and honesty in expressing the ideas you stand for, and it would be nice to see that. I would also like to see the same thing on the other side, which would make for some badass, interesting debates.
I would love nothing more than a kick-ass set of top-tier Democrat candidates. After 4 years of Donald Trump, we have a primary filled with actually people who have real visions for the country on both sides. And the people of this country.
At best, I think Vivek is already the Ron Paul, next new generation Ron Paul of USA or American society. And the current generation of Republicans, all the guys in their early 40s or late 30s, are all basically the Ron Paul Republicans. Vivek is going to create another crop of Vivek Ramaswamy Republicans for the next 30 years. Fair enough. Didn't get shit. That does not bother Vivek himself. So why should we bother? Ash Ketchum is saying he's already up in the polls for Ohio State Governor. Yeah. I was pretty sure about him running for Ohio Governor, but I've been thinking, might he get something in the cabinet or near about the cabinet adjacent? I don't know what department he would work best in, because he doesn't play well with others. He wants to fire everyone. So I'm not sure. Maybe governor only.
Can choose between those competing visions without insult or injury being the way I would love nothing more than to see that in 2028.
Who do you think? So for me, I would love to see in some kind of future where it's you versus somebody like Tim Walz. So to Tim Walz, maybe I'm lacking in knowledge. Is first of all, like a good dude, has similar to you, strongly held, if not radical, ideas of how to make progress in this country. So to just be on stage and debate honestly about the ideas that are like there's a tension between those ideas. Is there other people? Shapiro's interesting also.
I would like to take on in earnest, in civil, but
Tim Walz versus Vivek Ramaswamy. What the fuck?
Contested context, right, of a debate. Who do you want to take on? You want to take on somebody who disagrees with you but still has deep ideology of their own. I think John Fetterman's pretty interesting, right? He's demonstrated himself to be somebody who is thoughtful, able to change his mind on.
And I think he's too old to debate Vivek Ramaswamy at this point.
On positions, but not in some sort of fake flippity-floppity way, but in a thoughtful evolution. Somebody who's been through personal struggles. Somebody I deeply disagree with on a lot of his views, and most of his views.
This vote bank sentence repeat karne se kuch nahi hoga. What vote bank did Donald Trump have in 2015?
But who I can at least say he comes across at least as somebody who has been through that torturous process of really examining your beliefs and convictions, and has, when necessary, been able to preach to his own tribe where he thinks they're wrong. I think it's interesting. I think that you have a number of other leaders probably emerging at lower levels on the left. Not everybody's going to necessarily come from Washington, D.C. In fact, the longer they're there, the more they in some ways get polluted by it. I think the governor of Colorado, he's an interesting guy. He's got a more...
No, Kaladin, he created that vote bank for himself by convincing them, because everyone... Ben Shapiro didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016 because he was a New York Democrat with 3 wives and 50 mistresses.
Libertarian tendency. I don't know as much about his...
Just WASP is not a category. It has to be white, evangelical, of a certain kind, only then.
Views on it from a national perspective, but it's intriguing to see somebody who has at least libertarian, freedom-oriented tendencies within the Democratic Party. I think that there are a number of, I don't...
See, I'm so good at profiling these days. A few days back in Twitter, from an anonymous account, I guessed the woman's gender, age, caste, everything, and the fact that she lived in USA. And also with AA, I guessed that she's a woman who is probably of Gujarati descent and lives in USA. I'm getting so good at this.
Foreseen him running for president, but I had a debate last year when I was running for president with Ro Khanna, who, say what you will about him, he's a highly intelligent person and is somebody who is at least willing to buck the consensus of his party when necessary. I think he recently, I would say lambasted, he phrased it very delicately, but criticized Kamala Harris's proposed tax on unrealized.
No, that WASP thing is not that significant. Otherwise, Barack Obama would not win landslide elections.
Capital gains. So I like people who are willing to challenge the orthodoxies in their own party because it says they actually have convictions. And so whoever the Democrats put up, I hope it's someone like that. And for my part, I have and continue to have beliefs that will challenge Republicans, that on the face of it may not be the policies that poll on paper as the policies you're supposed to adopt as a Republican candidate. But what a true leader doesn't just tell people what they want to hear. You tell people what they need to hear, and you tell people what your actual convictions are. And this idea that I don't want to create a right-wing entitlement state or a nanny state, I want to shut it down, that challenges the presuppositions of where a lot of the conservative movement is right now. I don't think the bill to cap credit card interest rates is a good idea because that's a price control just like Kamala Harris's price controls, and it'll reduce access to credit. I don't think that we want a crony capitalist state showering private benefits on selected industries that favor us, or that we want to expand the CFPB or the FTC's remit and somehow we're going to trust it because it's under our watch. No, I believe in shutting it down. That challenges a lot of the current direction of the conservative movement.
Yes.
I believe in certain issues that, maybe even outside the scope of what Republicans currently care about right now.
Yeah.
One of the things that I oppose, for example, is, this is not a top issue in American politics, but just to give you a sense for, how I think and view the world. I'm against factory farming of a large scale of, you could sort of say, putting the mistreatment of, it's one thing to say that you need it for your sustenance, and that's great, but it's another to say that you have to do it in a factory farming setting that gives special exemptions from historical laws that have existed that are the product of crony capitalism. I'm against crony capitalism in all its forms. I'm against the influence of mega money in politics. I don't think that's been good either for Democrats or Republicans. Some of those views, I think, are...
If there was some space left in my heart to become a further bigger fan of Vivek Ramaswamy, I just became one.
Are not necessarily the traditional Republican, right? Orthodoxy, reading chapter and verse from what the Republican Party platform has been. It's not against the Republican Party platform.
No, I guessed it a long time back, a few days or I think months back in another live stream, because we were discussing one brilliant point, observation you had given about Bengali society when I said that it's such a nice thing that because of capitalism, casteism is breaking down and upper castes are delivering food to me on Swiggy. And you first said that it's not a good thing that upper castes are delivering food. So I thought you were just a casteist person. In the next comment, you clarified that no, upper castes are already privileged and therefore they should be off better doing higher paying jobs. Why are upper castes doing Swiggy? Then what the fuck are lower castes doing in Bengal? So because of that, we have spoken about you multiple times on this podcast. And that's when I guessed that you are a Gujarati girl or woman who lives in USA. I'm not sure about your age. I think mid 30s, late 30s, early 40s, probably.
But it's asking what the future of our movement is.
Some of these things are hard, like getting money out of politics.
Getting mega money.
The mega money, yeah.
And so long as it exists, you got to play the game. I mean, if you're going to play to win. I think one of the things I realized is that you just can't compete without it. But you want to win the game in order to change the game. And I think that that's something that I keep in mind as well. So
you have written a lot. You're exceptionally productive. But even just looking book-wise, you've written basically a book a year for the last 4 years. When you're writing,
and for some reason, this book, Truths, is not available in India, as well as Nation of Victims. Why the fuck? Who's blocking secretly his books from India?
Thinking about how to solve the problems of the world, to develop your policy. How do you...
Elon Musk is big money in politics and as well as Chinese money, a lot of it.
What do you think?
I need quiet time, extended periods of it that are separated from the rush of the day-to-day or the travel. I actually think a lot better when I'm working out and physically active.
Boishalidi, it's a fact, but we can't go around saying these things openly because it makes anyone in BJP listening to our podcast here, anyone from a local level Karyakarta to Prime Minister Modi, they are going to get complacent because of these comments.
Active, so from running.
So unless you are in BJP, never say these things in public.
Playing tennis, lifting. Somehow for me, that really opens up my mind. And then I need a significant amount of time after that with a notebook. Usually carry around a notebook everywhere I go and write it down in there.
Is the notebook full of chaotic thoughts or is it structured?
Sometimes it's chaotic, sometimes it's structured. It's a little bit of both. Sometimes I have a thought that I know I don't want to forget later. I'll immediately jot it down. Other times, on the flight over here, I had a much more structured layout of, I got a lot of different projects in the air, for example, and I cross-pollinate. I was in the shower this morning, had a bunch of thoughts, collected those on my plane ride over here. So I think that writing is something in all of its forms that helps me. It's one of the things that actually helped me this year was actually writing this book. You're going through a presidential campaign, you're going at super speed. And if I was to do the presidential campaign again, the thing I would do is actually to take more structured breaks. I don't mean breaks as in just like vacations, but I mean breaks to reflect on what's actually happening. Probably the biggest mistake I made is last time around, heading into the first debate, I was like in 9 different states over 7 days. I would have just taken that as a pause, right? We're at halfway through, you've established relevance. Now make sure the country sees who you actually are in full, rather than just the momentum, competitive driven version of you. And I just think that that's sort of taking those moments to just take stock of where you are, do some writing. I didn't do much writing during the presidential campaign. I enjoy writing. It's part of how I center myself. part of what this book allowed me to do is, okay, I ran that whirlwind of a campaign. The first thing I started doing after I collected myself for a couple of weeks was take the pen and start writing. And I was committed to writing that book, whether or not anybody read it. I was just writing it for myself. And actually, it started in a very different form. It was very personal, reflection oriented. So most of that, funny enough, I've learned about writing the books, Lex, is
Just edit it out.
it just didn't end up in the book because it went in a different direction than like what's interesting for a publisher to publish.
Yeah.
And so for each of my books, the things that I started writing ended up never in the book anyway, just because the topic ended up morphing. But the journey that led me to write this book, a lot of it in this book is still in there. This is my 4th book in 4 years, you're right. And I hope it's the most important one, but it is certainly the product of an honest reflection that whatever it might do for the reader, it helped me to write it. And I think that's one of the things that I learned from this campaign was not just all the policy lessons, but even just as a matter of personal practice, the ability to take spaces of time to not only physically challenge yourself, work out, et cetera, but to give yourself the space to reflect, to recenter yourself on the why. Had I done that, I think I would have been even more centered on the mission the whole time, rather than, you get attacked on the way, you're thrown off your tilt or thrown off your balance. It becomes a lot harder for someone else to do that to you if you've really centered yourself on your own purpose. It's probably one of my biggest learnings.
So you've mentioned the first primary debate. So more than almost basically anybody I've ever seen, you stepped into some really intense debates.
Yeah.
On your own podcast, but in general, kind of in all kinds of walks of life, whether it's sort of debates with sort of protesters or debates with people that really disagree with you, like the radical opposite of you. What's the philosophy behind that, and what's the psychology of being able to be calm through all of that, which you seem to be able to
I enjoyed
The philosophy is not being a socialist woke pussy nut job.
debate. And for me, I think just in ordinary life, forget about like a formal debate setting. Whenever I've received criticism or a contrary view, my first impulse is always, are they right? I mean, it's always a possibility, right? And most of the time what happens is you understand the other side's argument, but you emerge with a stronger conviction in your own belief, right? You know your own beliefs better if you can state the best argument for the other side.
Of course.
But sometimes you do change your mind. And I think that that's happened over the course of my life as well. I think no one's a thinking human being unless that happens once in a while too. And so anyway, just the idea of the pursuit of truth through open debate and inquiry, that's always just been part of my identity, part of who I am. I'm wired that way. I thrive on it. I enjoy it. Even my relationships with my closest friends are built around heated debates and deep-seated disagreements. And I just think that's beautiful, not just about human relationships, but it's particularly beautiful about America, right? Because it's part of the culture of this country, more so than other countries, China or India, or, Asian cultures, even a lot of European cultures are very different, where that's considered not genteel behavior. It's not the respectful behavior. Whereas for us, part of what makes this country great is you could disagree like hell and still get together at the dinner table at the end of it. I think we've lost some of that, but I'm on a bit of a mission to bring that back. And so, I don't know whether it's in politics or not, I'm committed in that next step, whatever the path is over the next 4 years. One of the things I'm committed to doing is making sure that I go out of my way to talk to people who actually disagree with me. And I think it's a big part of how we're going to save our country.
Are they right is the thing I actually literally see you do. So you are listening to the other person.
Yeah.
For my own benefit, to be honest, selfish.
You also don't lose your shit. So you don't take it personally. You don't get
the separate
emotional.
skill set.
But you get emotional sort of in a positive way. You get passionate, but you don't get, it doesn't, I've never seen you broken.
Never gets pissed off.
Like to where they get you like outraged. It's always probably because you just love the heat.
I love the heat, and I'm a curious person. Yeah. So I'm always curious about what's actually what's motivating the person on the other side. That curiosity, I think, is actually the best antidote, right? Because if you just try to stay calm in the face of somebody attacking you, that's kind of fake. But if you're kind of curious about them, right? Genuinely, just wondering, I think most people are good people inherently. We all maybe get misguided from time to time, but what is it that's moving that person to go in such a different direction than you? I think as long as you're curious about that, the climate change protesters that have interrupted my events, I'm as fascinated by the psychology of what's moving them and what they might be hungry for as I am concerned about rebutting the content of what they're saying to me. And I think that that's certainly something I care to revive. We don't talk about in politics that much, but reviving that sense of curiosity, I think is in a certain way, one of the ways we're going to be able to disagree, but still remain friends and fellow citizens at the end of it.
I agree with you. I think fundamentally most people are good. And one of the things I love most about humans is the very thing you said, which is curiosity. I think we should lean into that.
You're a curious person. I know this podcast is basically born of your curiosity, I'm sure. And so I just think we need more of that in America. That kind of, when I talked about our founding fathers, we were joking about it, but they were inventors, they were writers, they were political theorists, they were founders of a nation. They kind of had that boundless curiosity too. I think part of what's happened culturally in the country is we've gotten to this place where, we've been told that stay in your lane, you don't have an expert degree in that, therefore you can't have an opinion about it. I don't know. I think it's a little bit un-American in terms of the culture of it. And yeah, it's one of the things I like about you, and why I was looking forward to this conversation too, is it's cool to have intellectual interests that span sports to culture to politics to philosophy. And it's not like you just have to be an expert trained in one of those things to be able to engage in it. But actually, maybe, just maybe, you might even be better at each of those things because you're curious about the other. The Renaissance man, if you will. I think we've lost a little bit of that concept in America, but it's certainly something that is important to me. And this year it's been kind of cool. After leaving the campaign, I've been doing a wide
This is the best part of the conversation. This is the best part of the podcast.
range of things, right? I've been picking up my tennis game again. I practiced at the Ohio State.
You're damn good at tennis.
I used to be better, but I'm picking up.
But his wife is fitter than him. Remember the burpees they were doing before elections?
Somebody online was trying to correctly. I think
Who's a throat surgeon, has 2 kids.
you shot a very particular angle of that video. I think they were criticizing your backhand was weak potentially because
that would be a fair criticism. But it's gotten better again.
Okay,
It's gotten better recently. I've been playing with I've been practicing with the Ohio State team in the morning. They're like number 1 in the country or close to it. Now the guys on the team play, but there's a couple coaches who were recently on the team. One of whom used to be a guy I used to play with in the juniors who invited me out. So I hit with them in the mornings alongside the team. My goal, I should be careful here.
No.
My hips are telling me this. So I've been playing so many days
Please
a week
don't.
that I
Do you know why Vivek's hips are damaged? Do you know he fell off the stairs? Do you know he was pushed?
set a goal for myself by the end of to play in a particular tournament.
After which he allegedly was put into a Christian private school. Before that, he used to study in a public school.
But we'll see if that happens or not.
No.
But regardless, it's been fun to get back into tennis. I was an executive producer on a movie, something I've never done before. It's called City of Dreams. It's about a story of a young man who was trafficked into the United States. It's a thriller. It's a very cool movie to be a part of. I have actually started a couple companies. One company in particular that I think is going to be significant this year, guiding some of the other businesses that I've gotten off the ground in the past. So for me, I'm re-energized now, where I was in the thick of politics for a full year there, and getting a little bit of oxygen outside of politics, doing some things in the private sector has actually given me a renewed sense of energy to, get back into driving change through public service.
Well, it's been fun watching you do all these fascinating things, but I do hope that you have a future in politics as well, because it's nice to have somebody that has rigorously developed their ideas and is honest about presenting them and is willing to debate those ideas out in public space. So I would love for you and people like you to represent the future of American politics. So Vivek, thank you so much.
Okay then. Thank you guys. Thank you for joining the live stream. This was a great, fun, educative, entertaining discussion. And we discussed a lot of key issues. I think it was a very fruitful experience to listen to him. It's always, of course. And it was more fruitful to discuss it with you guys. And where do we place Vivek as fans of him, but also as an American? That was a nice place to, I think. We pursued that to a little degree. We have not arrived there completely, of course. We don't know exactly where he stands in relation to India, or at least where do we put him in our minds, of course. It's, of course, going to be a pretty ambiguous, some sort of a floating space. Let's see. Thank you for joining, guys. Good night.
वंशवरूढं महाभीमं गुणाद्रष्टाङ्गरप्रदं हस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरां मुक्तकेशिं लज्जयः पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् काली काली महाकाली कालिके पापहारिणी धर्मर्थमोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते धर्मर्थमोक्षदे देवी